committee meetings today. Just a reminder that at the start of the board meeting later this morning, we will have a moment of silent reflection to honor and show respect for the 215 missing children discovered buried on the grounds of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. And first up today is Planning and Development Services Committee. So I'm going to turn things over to Chair Canola. Go ahead, Chair Canola.
Thank you, Chair Kovacevic. I'll look for a motion to accept the agenda for the, thank you, Director Bush and Director Bauer. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. All right, first item is zoning and amendment bylaw 2895, regulation of metal storage containers. I will refer to CAO Mr. Knoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've been talking about the metal containers for, well, since October of 2020, and lots of interesting aspects to this. Of course, it came to our attention because there's a prolific use of them. Some people really like them. They serve a nice purpose. Others, probably the ones that aren't using them, have concerns about them. And there's lots of different uses for them. So it sometimes goes further than just zoning into implications for the building code. So we've been struggling with what's fair to put rules around containers, and we've had a number of public information meetings and public hearings, and we've had it out to our Planning Development Committee for discussion. And Mr. Garrish is bringing back really three options. Obviously, one of them is to just rescind the bylaw and treat them as accessory buildings. But we've got a couple of options that will go to Mr. Garrish to explain, and then we'd like to get some additional feedback from our committee. So we'll turn it over to Mr. Garrish, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Danny, am I able to share my screen? I've got my PowerPoint ready. Okay, let's get this up going. Okay, so I've got a few slides to run through. Some of them are just some basic background, again, for the benefit of the committee, because I know it has been a few months since we last were able to discuss shipping containers. So as the CAO has indicated, they are popular for a variety of reasons, versatility, ease of use, but they also come with aesthetic considerations, safety concerns. We have heard from residents in the past about potential targets for break-ins, and then building permit implications, especially when they're being modified. Again, as the board may be aware, at the moment, metal storage containers are regulated through the building bylaw and the electoral area zoning bylaws. The building bylaw since 2019 has required the issuance of a siting permit prior to the placement of a container on a property, whereas with the zoning bylaws, they generally establish regulations in terms of the siting, so where on a property a shipping container can go, and that's generally in accordance with the accessory building and structure regulations in each zone. So prior to 2018, the building bylaw was silent on storage containers, and the zoning bylaws don't specifically reference metal storage containers, but internally as an interpretation, we do consider them to be basically accessory buildings or structures. Accessory buildings and structures are permitted in almost all zones, and as I was just saying, that when they are constructed, they must comply with height setbacks, parcel coverage, etc., as set out in that zone. So here I've got a couple slides with some examples around the area. These three of these pictures show how containers are either modified or used as part of a larger structure, supporting roofs or moving certain areas. And then we also see them in relation to residential uses. So either they become part of the residential use themselves, they're placed outside of a house, either as part of an active building permit application or potentially as part of a relocation or move from the house. And then with the picture at right, if you can see it with my cursor here, they do sometimes blend in with the nature of the dwelling unit and are used for storage purposes as you would with your typical shed, garage, or similar type structure. So from a staff perspective, in relation to the siting permits, we do support those. We feel that they're a proactive and effective, efficient way to do bylaw enforcement in relation to containers. The alternative is reactive enforcement, basically responding to written complaints that are submitted to the regional district. This can be time consuming and costly. We also do feel, despite the recommendations before you today, that siting permits will support the proposed zoning regulations. And even if siting permits are removed from the building bylaw, there still may be enforcement issues in relation to them, especially when again it comes to the modifications where health and safety might become a concern. Issues with the zoning amendments, we do feel that amending the bylaws to specifically address storage containers is beneficial, primarily in terms of providing clarity on how these containers are viewed in the context of zones. We also note that for the extent that we do receive complaints or comments on containers, it's generally in the rural and residential zones. Rural residential and residential zones. And that, the current form of the regulations attempts to address some of those concerns. And, we also believe that the exemptions provided for the short-term use, construction and moving is beneficial as well. So again, just got a few more slides on background. So where we're at the moment, draft bylaw 2895 is still structured in a way that in relation to the rural zones being resource area, ag and large holdings, as well as the industrial, the only regulation being proposed other than existing zoning regs for accessory buildings and structures is a cap on the number of containers that can be stacked, which would be 2. Within the residential zones being the RS1, RS2, RS3, etc., and also the small holding zones, the bylaw currently contemplates a half-hectare minimum parcel size in order to qualify for a metal storage container. And in those situations where a property is large enough, the amendment bylaw is proposing that the container be colored or matched to the principal dwelling unit, and that they also not be placed between the main house and the front parcel line. Again, that's for aesthetic reasons. And the bylaw does currently allow for the temporary use, again, related to building projects or relocation from a dwelling or a premises. So again, just more background. First and second reading was approved in October. We had a public hearing in November. There were some concerns about people's ability to access the WebEx hearing, so we had a second public hearing on December 15th. And then the amendment bylaw was brought back for third reading in February, at which point it was deferred and was sent to committee and considered there on February 18th. And so the proposals before you today are based on some of the comments, because there was no formal resolution. Some of the comments that were provided by committee at the meeting on February 18th. And so as the CIO has indicated, there's 4 options basically available to the board today. And I'll go through these each in their own slide shortly, but option 1, which is the recommended option from administration, would be to make some changes to 2895, primarily to reflect some of the comments that were made at the February 18th P&D committee. Option 2 would be to have the amendment bylaw revert back to the original form that was proposed when it was first at committee in March of 2020. Option 3 would be to see the bylaw unchanged and just proceed as is. And then option 4, obviously, if none of these work, the option to abandon the bylaw exists. So I'll just run through some of these quickly. Before I do, though, I just wanted to put this slide up, and I know it's at the back of your report, because some of the proposed regulations make reference to shipping containers that are less than 10 square meters in area, having allowances in the small holding zones. So, I'm not well versed in shipping containers and what the popular models are out there, but these seem to be the 3 main types that are available either for rent or for purchase by property owners. There's the 40-foot one, the 20-foot, and the 10-foot one. The 10-foot one, the measurements on that are, I think it's 10 feet by 8 feet. So when we're talking about shipping containers less than 10 square meters in area, it would be the version at the bottom of the 3 options here is shown. So with that, going on to option 1, which is the recommended option. So If changes are made to 2895, as proposed in this option, it would be to have shipping containers prohibited in the residential town and village center zones and the administrative and open space zones. Again, that's based on feedback and also, the approach that we see applied in the member municipalities where the use of containers in residential neighborhoods does not really seem to be appropriate. With the town and village center zones, the thinking there is that we do have, for the most part, development permit area designations over these same locations that are primarily concerned with aesthetics, form and character. And so allowing shipping containers to go into those zones might be inconsistent or incompatible with the development permit area designations that exist. We are proposing in the small holding zones that there be an allowance made for one metal storage container per parcel, subject to it not exceeding the maximum 10 square meters. And also, again, with regulation requiring that it not be placed between the front parcel line and the main building. Similarly, we're allowing or proposing that they be allowed in the commercial and tourist commercial zones, again, with many of the same restrictions as the small holding zones, except not the floor area restriction. We also are proposing to maintain the stacking limit to no more than 2, and also proposing to maintain the exemptions. Now, in relation to the other options that are before the board, again, option 2, which was taking it back to the original proposal considered by the board in March of 2020. So for the board's benefit, that was basically prohibiting metal storage containers in all zones, with the exception of most of the rural zones, being resource area, agriculture, and large holdings, and the industrial zone. Again, the stacking limit of 2 and an allowance for the temporary use exemptions. I have the asterisks here because when we originally made that proposal to committee, it was based on a review or benchmarking of what the member municipalities were doing, and for the most part, this proposal is consistent with their approach to shipping containers. Option 3, which is the current form of Amendment Bylaw 2895, which I won't go over again because I've already touched on it, would be basically no change and it proceeds as is. And then finally, option 4, rescind first and second reading and abandon the bylaw, revert to the current status quo. Current status quo is that we, in planning at least, would continue to interpret metal storage containers as accessory buildings and structures. They would be permitted in all zones, subject to building compliance. And I suppose if this was the option pursued by the board, there would be no change to the building bylaw as a result. So consequently, the siting permit would remain in place as well. That's it for my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions that the board may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrish. Get the screen back. Do we have any questions for Mr. Garrish at this point? Boardroom, I assume that's Director Kozakovich.
Great, thank you very much, Chair Canola. My question is, with the administrative recommendation, item 1 there, to prohibit the metal storage containers in residential, I agree with, but then it says town and village center, and I'm wondering, how is that applied to the Naramata Village Center Zone, which has commercial, a mix of commercial and residential properties within one specific zone? Because those businesses there are going to, I believe they already have storage containers, but they would be using them. So by passing the administrative recommendation, would that mean they would not be able to utilize them?
Mr. Garrish?
That's correct. And again, our thinking there is that in relation to Naramata, it does have the Naramata Village Center form and character DP over it, which is primarily concerned with aesthetics. And we had a hard time rationalizing the ability to put a shipping container on a property in that type of a zone when the DP seems to be speaking against that type of development happening.
Thank you. Director Gettins, please.
Thank you to the chair. The recommendation that the number 1 recommendation with the small holdings, so it doesn't really support the feedback for sure that I heard from Lower West Bench. Part of what we are constantly sort of pushing against is industrial uses in West Bench, and it's a rural residential area, and then we kind of always had this sort of industrial edge that we're trying to maintain and not allow happen. So one of the things that was really important and well received from the bylaw, how it has been read so far, is that half hectare it has to be a property that's at least a half hectare. So is there a way to amend option 1 to keep that so we don't have in these rural residential areas where there might be quite a few smaller parcels right beside one another that you have to have at least a half hectare in order to allow the shipping container?
Mr. Garrish, please.
Yes, I mean, we can certainly make further changes to the amendment bylaw based on direction provided by the committee today, and if it's a request that we re-implement the half hectare for the West Bench, or if because the West Bench has its own unique zones because of the geotech hazards, if those zones are to be included with the prohibition, we can restructure the bylaw that way as well. So that there are options there.
Okay. If I may, as a follow-up then?
Yes, by all means.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to somehow make that work then for Greater West Bench, whether it be on our own bylaw and we do our own thing, or we add the half hectare. Either way works. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Vasilaki, please.
Thank you. Mr. Garrish, I remember several years back we had the same discussion about containers. And I think at one point, several directors brought up the idea of perhaps even in the residential areas, we could use the smallest containers as long as they were fenced in so that they weren't visible by other property owners, for example, the neighbors or from the street side of the property. I'm sorry, but I might have missed it in the report. I didn't see any there. Is there a way that that could be put into place?
Mr. Garrish?
There is. The current structure of 2895 basically contemplates much of what you said in terms of requiring that they not be placed in prominent locations in front of a dwelling unit, and that they try to be color matched to match the existing dwelling unit to help them blend in. But I mean, it was difficult for the last P&D committee because obviously we're back at committee because the board wasn't happy with the structure of 2895. And based on the comments that were made at that previous committee, the bylaw has been restructured. So I appreciate that my attempt to do so might not captured all the board's concerns in this area. So we can certainly reintroduce some of those requirements if the board feels that they are beneficial to keep in 2895.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
I'd like to intercede here on one thing. The 10-foot cargo containers are extremely rare. I venture to say that quite likely Big Steel Box or Okanagan Containers wouldn't even have one of those on hand at this point, and they probably have to bring it in special order. The 20-foot is the common container, so you might want to change that to the 20-foot model, which I believe is 1,400 meters, or 14 meter square model. As like I say, the 10s are there, but they're extremely rare. Thank you, Mr. Garrish. RDOS board, please. Boardroom.
Yes, thank you, Chair Canola. I feel that we've got too much going on here in this initial approach. This seemed to stem out of residential properties, generally RS zoned, side-by-side properties in some of our rural communities where people are putting a storage container in their front yard or taking up their whole driveway, and it's a real eyesore to the neighborhood. I would like to see us start simple to begin with and really just focus on RS zones. And of course, there are exemptions for when they are rebuilding a home and you have a period of time you're allowed to have a storage container there, of course. But if we just focused on RS zones, see how we do with that, we can always amend the bylaw down the road. But to me, it seems like we're getting into every zone out there with a mix of suggestions here. And I think it's just a little bit complicated right now. From the citizens I heard from, the focus is residential zones, and they don't want one of these in the front yard of their neighbor taking up half of that property. Just my thoughts on it. Thank you.
Would you want to make a motion to that effect, Director Kovacevic?
We're going to go to CIO Newell.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So that's a fair point. I'd have to check with Mr. Garrish. I think if we don't put rules around the other areas, that they would just draw back on accessory building, and the rules in all of the other zones except residential would still be enforced, but based on our existing rules around accessory buildings.
Okay, I think I'm understanding that. Okay, Director Gettens, please.
Thank you. I was just going to follow up, Chair, with Director Kozakovich, and that if it is the residential zones only, but now what CAO just said, maybe not. Again, I just think small holding sticks. I'm really concerned that we've done 2 readings of a bylaw. We've had public information meetings. We've asked for feedback. We heard from the report that there's a 3-to-1 in favor of some kind of restriction, and then to take a very sharp turn on what we've already passed in the first 2 readings without going back to public consultation. I don't know how we're really making sure that we're fulfilling what the citizens are expecting. So can I just get some kind of comment on how, do we go back to the public if we go in a completely different direction, or how does that work?
Mr. Garrish? Possibly CAO Newell.
Well, the short answer is yes. If you change where the bylaw is at second reading, then you got to do another public hearing.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that and say that, I mean, as the board knows, a public hearing is very statutory, and it's not really a good venue for debate and discussion. It's just an opportunity for us to say I oppose or I support. So depending on the extent of the changes that the board directs may happen to 2895, there may be a strong argument to going back out to the community again to see, you know, if they want to modify or change their comments based on, you know, the new direction the bylaw is going in.
If I can have a follow-up, Chair?
Yes, by all means.
Thank you. So if we go in towards option 1, and that's the will of the board, that's a big enough change to go back out to the public. Is that what I'm hearing, just for clarity?
Mr. Garrish?
I would favor that, but I would also encourage the board to give us direction if they have specific ideas about that, because is it simply going out to ask residents, or would you prefer to have your APCs also have a look at it as well, in which case we can certainly schedule that for forthcoming meetings.
I'm of the thought that we may want to have our APCs take a look at this. It's a much deeper issue for some areas other than others. It's got a lot of different legs to it. Director Monteith, please.
To the chair, I know that we've talked about this for a while, and I feel like we're getting closer. I do know that my APC does want to hear about this, and they do want to be involved, so I do appreciate that. You know, the challenge truly for Area I is apex, and when you got those homes so close to each other, and then somebody puts in a storage container, and then their neighbors do, and then they're competing on who's got the bigger storage container. And I know there's great uses for them, but there's aesthetics issues. When I look at the other parts of Area I, some of my area likes them and uses them, and they use them well. So I feel like addressing the size of the property and the location is important. And I feel like recommendation 1 does head us in that direction. So I would like to make the administrative recommendation with the modification. Can we modify it to address the removal of the town and village center? Are we able to do that at this point?
Mr. Newell?
Yeah, you can do whatever you want at this point.
Would you like to modify a motion there, Director Monteith, please?
Yes.
Would you?
Director Kovacevic was looking at doing the removal of the town and village center. And I'm not even sure what the open spaces zones are.
Mr. Garrish, please.
That would be Parks and Recreation, conservation area, and sorry, I think there's a third one. Our new lakes zoning might fall under that one as well.
I think that might be okay to stay there because you typically don't have storage containers on public spaces. So, but I do see that village centers, businesses may use them for seasonal storage. So.
think before we move the motion, I've got a hand from the boardroom. I assume that's Director Quebec.
Yes, thank you. I still have concerns. I see administrative there, so if that's AI, if that's administrative institutional, are we telling the schools that they can't have a storage container, or the churches, because both Naramata School and Naramata Church are utilizing the storage container right now? This open space zone, I wasn't quite clear on that, but we have a couple storage containers in use at Manitou Park off to the side to store all of our equipment. So everything in number one, I'm not in support of except for residential in line item 1. I cannot support if we do proceed with the village center, because that's, for Naramata, that's our commercial area. That's where we have commercial business, and they need to be able to use storage containers. So I'd be okay with line number 1 if it just was residential zones and the rest was eliminated. But you know, this seems like we may need more work on this clearly still, and I think it's something that we should be referring out to our APCs and get some feedback from the public. And Chair Canola, CAO Newell would like to speak.
Thank you. CAO Newell, please.
Could we get a clarification from Mr. Garrish on what the rules are around accessory buildings in commercial and town center zones now?
Well, sorry, for the metal storage containers in a commercial zone, what the regulations are, or?
Well, we know what you're proposing as far as metal storage containers, but what are the existing rules on accessory buildings in those zones that you are already using?
It varies based on the zone, but I mean, for the most part, the expectation is that they comply with setbacks, building height, and parcel coverage. Some of those zones will specify separate requirements for accessory buildings and structures. Others won't. Others will just consider them all to be the same from a built form perspective. Those village and town center zones, their parcel coverage tends to be a lot higher than, say, a C1 or a CT1 zone. So CT1 might be 35% parcel coverage. Village and town center zone might be 70, 80, potentially up to 100% parcel coverage. Sometimes the setbacks in those zones are 0 setbacks, reflecting the historical development pattern where parcels were developed right up to the parcel line and the street frontage. And in terms of building height, it is higher. It can be anywhere from 12, and I think we even have one that might be 15 meters in height up at Apex. So, you know, I'm not quite sure how that would impact the stacking provision. They'd still have to get a building permit. But if there was no limit on stacking and they're in a village center zone, it's conceivable they could go maybe 3 high.
As long as they have a building permit.
Yeah, subject to a building permit being issued.
Thank you, Mr. Garrish. Director Gettens, please.
Thank you, Chair. I support going back to the APCs. I know for sure our APC definitely wants to be included in this bylaw somehow for Lower West Bench. It's again something that we, as part of our OPC, we don't want the industrial use up here, and we do need some kind of structure around it. So if this is the way the board is heading, I support going the APCs and just making sure that Area F doesn't want their own small holding 6. That would be my only comment, please.
Thank you. I'd have to say for Area C, I'd have trouble supporting number 1. I'd like to see it go back to the APCs myself. So I guess at this point, can I get Ms. Malden to read out the motion as it stands?
So Director Monteith suggested that in item 1 of the resolution or the recommendation that town and village center be removed. Then there was further discussion. I didn't see a seconder on any of that. And I'm unclear as to whether part 2, allow a maximum of 1 metal storage container, remains in that. So I'm afraid I can't really read it back because I'm not understanding fully what is actually the motion at this point.
Yeah, I'm struggling here too. One other thing too, that in all of it proper, I do know that the Tuckalnewt School has from time to time used these containers for storing their sports equipment. They are extremely secure, and it's been useful for them. So we might want to proceed with caution on how we we do this. Director Monteith, would you want to clarify your motion or withdraw it?
I'm wondering if we could have APCs look at it as we're presenting now. And then if we bring it back to committee with that feedback, that maybe we'd be more comfortable with proceeding with the direction.
Mr. Newell?
Sure.
Would that indicate that we'd have to withdraw, that Director Monteith would have to withdraw her motion? It wasn't seconded, so I believe she can still do that.
Yeah, if it's not seconded, it's not in the possession of committee. So we wouldn't have to do anything with it. You could just direct us to send it back out to the APCs. The only thing I'd caution is if we're expecting consensus from the APCs, that is unlikely. And typically what an elected body would do is come up with a direction and then send it out for comments, because then the APCs can focus on a specific recommendation. So am I sensing that we're just right back at the brainstorming stage?
That is somewhat where I'm standing right at the moment, Mr. Noel. Option 3, I know I spoke with Director Pendergraft earlier about this. Option 3 was the closest one that seemed to fit, the more rural of the areas. So yeah, we're still having a bit of a dilemma between the differences in the areas. Director Gettins?
Thank you, Chair. I actually am in favor of option 3. That kind of ticks the boxes for area F. So that's the one that I would like to see move forward. And that's also the one that that's our first, and that's the one we've read first and second and are looking to do a third reading on, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm in favor of option 3. So if that works for the more rural areas like option C, I'm on board.
Are you making a motion to move option 3?
Sure, I'll make the motion.
We have a seconder. I'll second it. Before we call a vote, Director Obrick, please.
Yes, and thank you to the chair. I just wanted to add a few comments. I agree with CAO that the APCs probably would benefit from a little more specific direction. This has been before our APC. We've had a very good discussion on it. I agree with Director Monteith. This is good progress. We're closer, and I think that's very positive. There's been a lot of work done on this, and it's appreciated. I agree with Director Canola that there's a real difference here between our electoral areas. And for example, I agree with Director Kazakovich. Her comments on the first point on the administrative recommendation, I just agree with her completely on all her comments. And that just illustrates how different perhaps electoral area D is maybe compared to Anarchist or Willowbrook. So I certainly don't know what the right balance is here, but I think the comments we've heard today on storage containers, boy, in Area D we're very diverse, and we have a little bit of everything. We've got a very urban town center, we've got some rural areas, and these containers are very. I'll just say one last thing. I was in Kelowna last summer in the arts and urban area there, where I saw a container that was spectacular, and it was an office. It was promoting a residential development. It was attractive to the street. It was functional. It had high value. So I think this is not the kind of one-size-fits-all rule that works really well. I think it's nuanced. I know we have one coming up before our APC in OK Falls, which if you look at what the owner has done in the last year, it is spectacularly positive, and yet may not fit under what I'm seeing here. So I do think we need more work, and how we proceed. It's maybe it's worth the effort for some of the electoral areas. I think some of the electoral areas maybe have a very different need, and so maybe the amount of work isn't the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Oberick. Director Pendergraft, please.
Yes, thank you through the chair. I can live with option 3 as long as the removal of the siting permits proceeds at the same time. So I want them to happen simultaneously, not one thing and then a year later we start the siting permit removal. If we can do that, I'm comfortable enough with option 3.
Mr. Newell.
Go
ahead.
Sure. So what is the recommendation? And just a reminder that everybody votes at committees, so all urban members as well. It's not just our rural members at committee. So are we recommending then that we proceed with option 3?
Well, my understanding is Director Pendergraft is making amendment to option 3 that would tie the removal of the siting permit to that motion.
Okay. So if Director Pendergraft wanted to put that on the floor and get a seconder, then we'd see what committee wants to do with that.
It's already in there.
Yeah, I would move that. They be tied.
Is there a seconder? Director Coyne Senior. Let's. At this point, we might as well call the question. All in favor? Oh, pardon me. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of someone here. Director Gettens, you had a comment before we call the question?
Thank you. Thank you. Just a point of clarity. If we remove the siting permit now, does that mean that any of the containers that were put in place without a siting permit, like, can we still use that provision in order to talk to some of our citizens that may have a container in their front yard right now? Or if we remove it from this bylaw, can we no longer use that proactive approach?
CAO Newell, please.
So if they're unpermitted right now, then they would fall under the new regulation. If they are permitted, then they'd be grandfathered.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Director Gettens? Oh, very good. Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. All right. That.
Sorry, Chair, to interrupt. I'm sorry. I did see a couple hands there with opposed. Just wanted to make sure I got those.
All right. Opposed? Director Oberick. I'm not seeing any on my screen other than Director Oberick.
Okay, thank you.
Just a note for clarification, with that motion passing, the second motion on initiating the removal of the siting permit requirement, does that still come to point? CAO Newell?
Well, I think at this point, what we're saying is we're going to send this back out to the APCs now with this direction from committee to get their input. But my understanding was we were taking the siting conditions out of the bylaw.
Yes, that's correct. So I'm guessing that removes the second portion of this. So that would call to an end their business for the Planning and Development Committee. And so I'd be looking for a motion to adjourn from this committee. Director Pendergraft, all in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That was painful. Back switch. Thank you very much, folks.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair Canola. Directors, we're going to move on to Corporate Services Committee. Please have a look at your agenda and looking for a motion to approve as presented. Moved by Director Bauer, seconded by Director Robinson. I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Anybody opposed? Okay, that motion carries. We'll go to item B, 2021 UBCM Convention, CAO.
So UBCM is scheduled for September 14th to 17th in 2021, and it will be virtual again this year as it was last year. So they now have their call out for resolutions that would go before the forum, and they also have the call out for meeting with ministers or the premier or staff. So we would have to have those into them by June 30th. So what we're doing right now is collecting resolutions, and then also if any member has a suggestion for a meeting with the minister that they'd want to propose, that would be helpful too. And then we'll bring those back on June 17th for ratification. So we have two proposed right now for resolutions. One is the organ donation, one that went to Silga, got defeated, and we want to bring it now directly to the floor at UBCM. So that's one. The other one was proposed on multi-jurisdictional issues, was proposed by Director Roberts, and we've struggled with some wording on this one. So we've brought back another version, and we'll need committee's feedback on whether that is something that they want to put forward to UBCM. And then if there are any other, we have some other resolutions I think that we're working on right now.
We had 5 that passed through Silga.
Well, the ones that pass through Silga will go in through Silga.
Yeah.
Right? The ones that we're interested in right now are the ones that were either defeated or weren't presented at Silga, because we have to enter those directly. So what we should do, Madam Chair, is talk about this one on multi-jurisdiction and see if this wording appeals to committee.
Okay. So I see Director Roberts has a hand up. This was his proposed resolution. So go ahead, please, Director Roberts.
Thank you to the chair. I had a question that I did send off in response when it got sent out, because in the whereas at the beginning, of course, we make clarity that we're talking about electoral areas. And I was wondering whether or not that was an issue or not in regards to the therefore, because it doesn't articulate again electoral areas, or do we believe that this is something that, because again, I believe it's more of an issue in electoral area where municipalities have, of course, their own abilities to work with or deal with jurisdictional issues, if I'm not mistaken.
CAO?
We'd have to get comment from our incorporated communities, Madam Chair, as to whether they thought that should be taken out and apply to everybody.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Director Holmes. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, just to that point, I don't think it needs to be specified. I mean, it certainly helps to reinforce that the province works with municipalities as well. I just wanted to make the point though that I think it needs a second whereas, stating like what the current practice is, what is the problem that we're trying to resolve here. So like something like the whereas the current practice leads to inertia or leads to nothing happening or something like that, if you see what I mean. I think there's kind of just a missing piece there, not explaining, what the problem is.
Okay, thank you. Director Roberts, comment on that?
Yeah, thank you to the chair. In discussion, I believe, with the CAO Newell and with Ms. Malden, I think there was or it was with Ms. Malden, it's almost like having a couple explanations to go along with it. So for instance, I'm dealing with an issue where I've got a 82-year-old resident that has for 5 years, three directors dealt with the MLA just to do fire smarting, fire cleanup in the alley behind his house, where now he's too old to do it on his own. And again, it's the jurisdiction of the MOTI. We recently had an issue where they took something into their own hands. We called the NRO in the past. You know, there's jurisdiction with Flynn Road, jurisdiction with leases from the forestry company, lease from RDOS and part of the road, the MOT coming to a stop. Then we even, like this particular issue of multi-jurisdictional, where all of a sudden the governmental systems and ministries flatten right out and silo, is an issue right down to dealing with our flood issues. You look at, in my area that I don't have a large tax base, but with the orphan dikes, trying to get things moving after year of different reports, the LIDAR, and we're looking at if there's a failure in area G above Karamias becomes the new Grand Forks. And it's just that we never seem in electoral areas to be able to get any movement on anything until somebody dies. Some large amount of destruction is taking place. And it really highlighted that I brought up to the MLA Rolly Russell recently was when the problem trailer was is on fire. It was in a high fire zone that isn't cleaned, lateral or fire smarted on Crown land behind a residential mobile home park. I see this stuff every day, and I'm
We're losing Danny?
We've lost you, Director Roberts. Director Roberts, we've lost you at this end in the boardroom.
Can anybody hear me here?
Steve,
Sorry, I just had a problem with my phone breaking into my Bluetooth.
Okay, we got you back. Keep going.
Okay, sorry about that. So again, I'm ending up in areas where I'm seeing a large amount of residents and property put at risk, health, safety, property damage. I'm looking at, you know, issues based around the lack of movement towards looking at the dikes that actually endangers a whole community. And I'm frustrated. Well, I'm not frustrated, I'm angry. You know, I want to get on a soapbox. I think this is one of the undercurrent situations that causes issues throughout all our electoral areas, province-wide, and I'd like to talk to the Premier about it. Like, I'm done. Thank you. Sorry for that.
Thank you, Director Roberts. I'm going to go to CAO Newell, then to Director Obrick. Go ahead, CAO.
Just on the politics of it, and going back to Director Holmes' point, there are 28 regional districts, including Island Trust, in the province of British Columbia, of the 200 local governments that will be represented at UBCM. When we word a resolution that affects only regional districts, the chances of the other 170 local governments being interested in that problem are probably reduced. So if there is some interest in the incorporated communities taking that particular clause out, that would probably be advantageous to the chances of success.
Okay, I see a thumbs up from Director Roberts that we could remove the wording of electoral areas. Okay, I'll go to Director Obrick now. Go ahead, please.
Yes, and thank you to the chair. I just agree with Director Roberts 100%. In the last week, I have had at least 3 calls from ratepayers who are, and they use, they're upset. They can be very upset, and they can use some pretty rough language. And by rough language, I mean they say things like they're frustrated. They say things like they're getting the corporate or the bureaucratic runaround. We have seen this repeat in Area D for years and years and years and years and years. I've spoken about it at this board table. I'm sure Director Holmes remembers June 6th, when we were talking about our concerns with Modi, and he very, I think, sincerely said, as a municipal appointed director, that he didn't even know why we were talking about it, because if it's not a problem, why fix it? That's how hard it is in an electoral area to even at this regional district board to get attention on some of these issues. I know my predecessor had trouble with this. August 1, 2019, I brought in 25 copies of former Director Siddon's motion where 13 out of 18 members opposed what he was asking for when it came to Modi. I remember May 24, 2019, when we had Mr. Jerry Berry speak to the board, and he said, the problem is that the public doesn't understand. And then he went on to explain things we don't understand, such as this issue of the multi-jurisdictional relationship. Indeed, last meeting, our staff member, Andrew Reeder, spoke to the issue in Headley and the abandoned vehicles and how difficult it is that people don't understand. And I want to say, and I said this on May 24 to Jerry Berry, I don't think that's the problem. People understand well, they pay taxes. They expect value for those taxes. They're reasonable, they're intelligent. When I talk to them, I don't have trouble with them understanding. I'll tell you, we had a motorhome, which we called the RCMP, we called Modi, we called RDOS. When I say numerous calls by myself alone, probably more than a dozen, the school principal called. We could not get action on, it was an unregistered, unlicensed motorhome being towed around like whack-a-mole from right beside the school to the beachfront, different, and the police couldn't do anything. Modi wouldn't or couldn't do anything. RDOS wouldn't or couldn't do anything. This abandoned vehicle issue goes back decades. I've talked to the police. I've talked to MLAs, and we can't get it dealt with because it's the department of not my department every time you call. And so in the end, with Jerry Berry, I said, that's not the problem. The problem isn't the public not understanding. The problem is us and those provincial responsible departments not getting the job done. And I'll ask Director Vasilaki, for example, how would his understanding, if he lived in Headley, affect picking up an abandoned vehicle? How would his understanding be material or relevant to getting that abandoned vehicle towed? This misdirection of the problem is the public doesn't understand. Director Roberts is a little frustrated and angry. Well, I join him in frustration and in anger. And we have been dealing with this for years and years and years and years. I remember August 1, Director Pendergraft came to me after meeting and said, Ron, you gotta slow down. These things take time. Director McCordoff came to me and explained to me how I didn't understand how things are slow and I have to be more patient. And I said, well, yeah, we've been talking about this in I was on the Community Association, on the Advisory Planning Commission, on the Parks and Rec Commission. I've been working on this for 10 years. I was one of the people talking to Director Siddon back when he brought that motion that was defeated 13-5. I've talked to directors off the table about this issue. So I just want to say thank you again to Director Roberts. Thank you to CAO. I think he hit a home run when he said the vast majority of our local governments in this province, just like our good Director Holmes, didn't see the problem because they don't have the problem. I know Director Bob Coyne sometimes doesn't have problems that others of us in this electoral area have. I've heard him say he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand. He doesn't have the problem. Well, that's part of the problem, is those of us who have the problem can't get it addressed because the rest who don't have the problem, don't see the problem, don't hear the issue. So I'm just going to say one more time, thank you to Director Roberts. I see his video shut down. I must have spooked him. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Obrick. We have quite a few hands up.
Forget mine then.
We're running out of time. Okay, I'm going to take CAO off the list. I'll go to Director Holmes, then Bauer. Then we need to move on to the next topic because we do have a delegation with our community services meeting.
Yes.
So, Director Holmes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think it's that we don't understand the problem. I think we understand the problem perfectly, understand exactly what Director Roberts and Director Obrick are saying. All I'm saying is you can't put all that into one resolution. And so all I'm saying is that I think you need a second whereas in the resolution that says something like, whereas the current practice creates misunderstanding and leads to inaction or something like that. You have to put all this into context, and it's not currently in context. That's what I'm saying. And I'd welcome Director Obrecht to maybe learn something about what the municipalities face to see that we do have similar problems with provinces. With the province, they might not be exactly the same, but we're not, two separate boats here.
Okay, thank you. Final comment from Director Bauer. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Exactly what Director Holmes just said. The issue that overlap multi-jurisdictional responsibilities is ancient. I've been talking to various ministries on various issues that affect both electoral areas and municipalities for the last 15 years. So this is nothing new. Quickly to the resolution. Yes, it could be more elaborate, but on the other hand, I don't really see that there is going to be a productive formation of an agency that has various members of various agencies in there to address the issues that were brought forward by the directors, but it can't hurt. I think we will be more successful by talking to the individual ministries and bring those issues that we have mentioned here before them, and hopefully that will lead to a more productive outcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, directors. So what I'm hearing is a suggestion of possibly a second whereas and the removal of electoral areas within that. So if I'm correct, and let me know if I'm not, Ms. Malden, we have another meeting that we can bring this to finalize it in time for it to get to UBCM. Is that correct, Ms. Malden?
That's correct.
Okay, so we're going to take another stab at the wording on this, and we'll move that forward to the next board meeting to make a final decision on. And then CAO, we still need to come up with suggestions for minister meetings. In your package, directors, there is the meeting request form. So that's in your package that was created not too long ago. So that could be filled out by you and submitted to Ms. Malden for suggestions. And then we can bring those forward to the next board meeting so that we can decide what meeting requests we want to put in to the province by the June 30th deadline. My understanding that deadline is for minister meetings, but there will be a deadline after that for staff meetings. So we would still be able to add something to the request for a staff meeting. Anything further, CAO?
No.
Okay, directors, if there's nothing further out of corporate, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn this meeting. Moved by Director Bush, seconded by Director Roberts. I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so we're right at 10 o'clock. That takes us to Community Services Committee, and I'll turn it over to Chair Bauer. Go ahead, please, Chair Bauer.
Thank you, Chair. Looking for a motion to approve the agenda. Director Gatton, seconded by Director Bush. All in favor and opposed? No one. Motion is carried. We have a delegation here, BC Transit, Chelsea Mossy and Adriana McMullen. So I'll hand it over to the two representatives to talk about BC Transit plans for the future. Not sure who's going to start.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Chelsea Rossi. I'm Senior Manager of Government Relations with BC Transit. I'm joined today by Adriana McMullen, our Senior Transit Planner for the South Okanagan-Similkameen Transit System. If you'll just give me a moment here, I'm just going to share my screen and bring up our presentation for today.
Okay, thank you and welcome for representing to the board. Whenever you're ready.
Everyone can see that?
Yes.
Great. So as I mentioned, my name is Chelsea Mossy, and I'm also joined today by Adriana McMullen, who will carry out the second half of the presentation. Today, I'm going to begin by giving a brief overview of the BC Transit model, as it's been a while since we've had the opportunity to be in front of your board. I'll then discuss BC Transit's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the impacts of the pandemic on public transit, and specifically on transit in your region. I'll then discuss a couple of our upcoming initiatives that we have underway at BC Transit before turning it over to Adriana to discuss expansions, as well as the Transit Future Action Plan that is just beginning for the South Okanagan-Similkameen Transit System. So BC Transit is the provincial authority that's responsible for providing transit throughout the province of British Columbia, outside of Metro Vancouver, where it's provided by TransLink. We work in partnership with 58 local government partners. Of course, in this case, that's the Regional District of Okanagan-Similkameen. We work with 18 private management companies, and in this case, that's Barry & Smith, 5 public organizations, and 14 nonprofits. This slide here just visually depicts BC Transit's partnership model. So on the one side, we work with the provincial government, who are responsible for setting public policy objectives, and the province also contributes approximately 50% of the funding for transit systems. BC Transit's responsible for delivering the transit service, and we also operate a shared services model. So through our shared services model, we have a variety of services available, including planning, scheduling, finance, marketing, safety and training, and so forth. BC Transit works with 58 local governments, as I mentioned, and it is our local government partners that are responsible for setting the priorities for their transit system. They're also responsible for setting the service levels, the areas served, the routes, and ultimately responsible for setting the fare structure for their transit system. BC Transit holds the contract with the local operating companies, and it's the local operating companies' responsibility to provide the day-to-day transit service delivery. They're also responsible for daily tasks such as lost and found, customer service, and so forth. And I'll now discuss the COVID-19 pandemic and its response, our response and its impacts. So in spring 2020, just over 1 year ago, we were all adapting to the early stages of a pandemic that was rapidly unfolding around the world. BC Transit took steps to respond quickly and to continue providing essential transportation services to those people who rely on it. Our process can be broken down into 3 phases. Initially, we were in the response phase, which consisted of enhanced cleaning of our buses, limiting capacity on board, and also for a time on our full-size buses that have dual doors, we moved to rear door boarding only to protect the safety of our operators. We're currently in the recovery stage of our response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which I'll describe in more detail in the next slide. And we look forward to eventually moving into the rebuild stage, which consists of ensuring the long-term sustainability of transit post-COVID-19 pandemic. So as I said, we're currently in the recovery phase of our response to the pandemic. And as you can see, our plans are aligned with BC's restart plan. Full driver barriers or vinyl panels have now been installed on all transit buses across the province. Enhanced cleaning protocols remain in place, and we continue to limit capacity to a comfortable passenger load to allow for physical distancing. Looking ahead, if we continue to see province-wide improvements in the COVID-19 pandemic, we'll be looking at the possibility of increasing allowable capacity on board buses in the fall. And we plan to focus heavily on a ridership recovery campaign, marketing and communications campaign. As we eventually look to come out of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's important to remember that transit will continue to play a part in supporting economic recovery, and it will also be there to address challenges that existed in communities prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, such as climate change, social isolation, and access to essential services. The timing of your Transit Future Action Plan, which Adriana will speak to later in the presentation, aligns well with our ridership recovery efforts. So this graph here compares 2019 provincial ridership, which is shown in green, to 2020 ridership, shown in blue, and you can see 2021 ridership shown in yellow. So this is ridership province-wide, and as you can see, the COVID-19 pandemic had an immediate and lingering negative effect on transit ridership across the province. The low point in ridership was in April 2020, where it dropped to nearly 80% of normal. But since then, there's been a slow and steady increase. And as of mid-May of this year, ridership around the province was at approximately 52% of 2019 ridership levels. This slide here shows ridership for the routes 40 and 41 through the 2019-20 and 2020-2021 fiscal years. So as you can see, the low point in ridership was in April 2020 when the pandemic first hit. And since that time, ridership has been steadily increasing. This slide shows ridership for the same period for the routes 10 Naramata-Penticton and the route 20 Okanagan Falls-Penticton. And again, you can see that the low point in ridership was in April 2020. And here we also see the impacts of the second wave of the pandemic, which followed summer 2020. And this slide shows ridership for the Route 70 connector, again for the 2019 and 2020 and 2020-2021 fiscal years. Common to the last three slides, the low point in ridership was in April 2020, and we then saw a significant increase in the summer of 2020 as the pandemic temporarily improved. And we have again seen a bit of an increase again in ridership as the pandemic improves coming out of the third wave. Adriana will speak more to ridership in her slides later on. So moving ahead to initiatives that we have coming up at BC Transit. BC Transit's working towards implementing an electronic fare collection system on our fixed route buses. Our ultimate goal is to remove barriers to selecting transit as a preferred method of transportation, and the system will introduce new ways to pay via your mobile device or your credit card. This system will also provide us with better data on who our customers are, and this will allow us, this will enable better decision making. We're currently in the evaluation stages of a negotiated RFP process, and we're conducting engagement sessions with our local government partners. And there will be much more to come on this project in the months and years ahead. In November 2018, BC Transit approved a low carbon fleet program to support provincial targets for greenhouse gas emissions, which aligns with the Clean BC plan. This plan is based on the fleet replacement needs for each of our vehicle classifications, so our light duty buses, medium duty buses, and heavy duty buses, which all operate in the South Okanagan-Similkameen transit system. And these timelines allow for a smaller deployment of electric buses by classification, which will allow us to obtain implementation and operating experience in each of the classifications of buses. Only compressed natural gas buses are planned to replace and expand the heavy duty and medium duty bus fleets at this time until their transition to electrification. In November 2020, BC Transit released an RFP to support the first deployment of 10 heavy duty battery electric buses. And as you'll see in the next slide, these will be introduced in Victoria next year. This slide here provides some key program objectives for the low carbon fleet program. I won't read them all out, but as you can see, we plan to begin purchasing only electric buses in all fleet classifications in 2028, and we plan to have a fully zero emission fleet by 2040. I'll now turn it over to Adriana to discuss upcoming expansions for your transit system.
Great. Thank you very much, Chelsea. Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see you. There's some familiar faces. Some of you may recall, maybe not, probably not. I was working on transit in your area back in 2013, 2014, and 2015. So anyhow, it's a pleasure to be back. And as you may recall, one of the really strong points that came out of your 2015 Transit Future Plan was a really strong desire for service access to Kelowna. And since that time, that's something that we've been able to make possible. And now we are looking forwards to improving that, to improve access, particularly from the communities that are outlying of Penticton, to be able to have more days of the week to comfortably reach Kelowna for their various needs. So the Route 70 started with commuter service in 2019 with early morning and sort of later afternoon trips running Monday through Friday. And then on Mondays, there were midday, a pair of midday trips that would run, one around, that runs around 9:30, and then goes back up to Kelowna around 12:30. And it's those two midday trips that really enable the connectivity for people that are coming in from other parts of the area. So those who are coming in on the Route 20, those that are coming in on the 40 and the 10. And yeah, so those are really great trips to have. So this coming January, what we will be doing is making those midday trips happen all days of the week. So that means that Monday through Friday, there will be 4 round trips a day from Penticton to Kelowna. And the people who are coming up from other communities will now have access on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So that's a really exciting thing, and it was delayed because of the pandemic or deferred, but we're back on track, and January for us in our universe is just around the corner. Next slide, please. And then one of the other pieces that came out of your 2015 plan was a really strong desire to have introductory service to the West Bench, some basic access for people to be able to get in and out of Penticton and home. You know, there's high school students, there's people who have shopping and other appointments and needs. And so that's another piece that we're looking to put in for this coming January. And so what you will likely see is 3 round trips a day. And this is a fairly standard start for service in a rural area. And then we'll monitor that carefully to see how it does. And, you know, if it performs well, then we will have a case for reviewing it and maybe adjusting it or improving it down the road. And this West Bench service is going to form part of the Okanagan-Similkameen transit service. So those are the smaller buses that provide service to Naramata and Okanagan Falls. And so the West Bench will be scheduled into their work. Next slide, please. And so, yes, the service design relates to the actual route that the bus takes and then the times of days that the bus goes. Those are shaped by the electoral area F survey and report that the regional district conducted, and then also our service design standards and performance guidelines. Yeah, and there we have it. You can see a little picture of the electoral area F West Bench report there and some of these other documents that I referred to. Next slide, please. And then outside of the RDOS partnership, we also have partnerships with the District of Summerland, and they have their Route 30, and they are also going to be seeing a service improvement. We will be able to add 10 new round trips a week. We're still determining when in the day those trips will run. There will be some public consultation happening, but those 2 will be starting at some point in early 2022. So maybe not January, it could be February, just because of the consultation that we need to conduct in order to move forward on it. But that is something that you will notice coming up in your new rider's guide when that happens. Next slide, please. So the Transit Future Action Plan. Next slide. So this slide is intended to be the update to the 2015 Transit Future Plan, which is a really intensive process that we had really strong participation in from all across your region. But it's been 6 years, things change. Actually, we started doing this a while ago, but then we had the pandemic hit. Anyhow, so the purpose of this plan is to inform future transit decision making. We have a lot of different entities and jurisdictions that form part of your transit rider's guide and your transit system. And so we need to make sure that everyone is on the same page about where we're going and how we're looking to evolve and improve the system for your communities. This will then in turn also inform what kind of fleet you're going to be needing and what kinds of infrastructure we should all be aware of that we may need to provide. Next slide, please. So just to take you a step into sort of the transit planning universe, the transit service hours and the types of service that you put out determine your fleet needs. So for example, if you are looking to put in more, say, handy dart type service, or service that serves people with accessibility needs and needs to go door to door, that service requires the little buses. So those are actually the same size buses that go out to Princeton and go up to Summerlin, but they also are special in that they are nimble and you can actually do handy dart like service with them. That's one service type. Another service type would be something like your commuter buses for the Kelowna route, where you want bigger buses that have a more comfortable highway ride and have more seating for people to be able to be seated for that ride. It's a long ride. It's a highway ride. It's safer to have people seated. And then the number of buses that you have in your fleet then also help us determine what kind of infrastructure you need. BC Transit, as with every transit agency, has a ratio of the amount of hours and kilometers that are permitted to run on a bus in order for that bus to reach its planned lifespan. So, and then also there's a ratio of garage bays that need to be provided in order to ensure that your fleet is adequately maintained. Building transit garages and transit exchanges are fairly lengthy projects, so we need to be aware of what is coming in terms of service changes so we can then have all of the supports we need to make that happen. Click slide, click please, Chelsea, great. And so, oh no, back. Sorry, thanks. And so my point is that that infrastructure that you have out on the ground in terms of your transit garages and your maintenance bays and your exchanges are constraints on how much fleet you can have out in your network. And the fleet is also a constraint on how many service hours you can put out. We can't put out service hours if we don't have the buses. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Chelsea. So with the initial Transit Future Action Plan, we had been hoping to be completing it in the last fiscal year. However, we had this little thing called COVID-19 come along, and then following that, there was a provincial snap election. And in that time, we also have been making some fairly hefty adjustments to how we do consultation, because as you understand, face-to-face and having in-person meetings and indoor spaces is really not something that we've been able to do. And so there have been some internal adjustments in our tools that are available. Next slide, please. So what we have done is we are updating the timeline for the Transit Future Action Plan. The new target for the completion of the plan is early 2022. And one of the other pieces that is being adjusted in the plan, which is not too impactful for you, is that the city of Penticton has asked us to, or has reminded us that one of the future actions that we had previously identified was looking at opportunities for simplifying the routes in Penticton and maybe improving access to the college. So with that in mind, it's going to create a little window of extra workshops we'll be doing targeted to them. Now that also creates an opportunity for any examinations of things that the RDOS would like relevant to your areas. However, we already have the boards ready to go for our next round of open houses as they relate to, say, the Route 40, the Route 30, the Route 20. So we hope to be out this fall, so for that engagement, and that would be probably sometime October, November, and that will be a big round of open house engagement. It'll basically be the the second bus counterpart to that transit future plan when we came out with the second bus last time, where we tried to reach a really huge number of people. We're not bringing the bus this time around, but the second phase of engagement is intended to be that catch-all where everyone in all of the communities will have an opportunity to look at the priorities and make sure that they are still valid and help us understand if there's been any shifting. We think now that the Route 70 implementation of the 4 round trips a day is happening, there might be new priorities rising to the top from across your area that we will then be able to put in the plan. And so next slide, please. My request to the board is that you endorse the revised timeline in the terms of reference document. We have updated it to reflect the new timeline and provided it to all of our partners. And then the next slide is just a bit of context. Again, since I've been involved in this part of the province, or I was involved a while ago, I was really interested to see how performance has changed and how ridership has changed since then. And so what I've plotted out here is a stacked bar graph of the performance across the different 4 systems going back to 2014, 2015. And so if we look at everything collectively, including Penticton, then there has been a 16% increase in ridership since the 2014-15. And one of the big changes that has happened, in addition to the creation of the 70, which wouldn't really be captured in that number because it had just started in 2019, was the creation of the one single rider's guide. You know, once upon a time, you had about 4 different rider's guides. And now we just have the one single rider's guide, and that makes a much more user-friendly system because people can at a glance look and see what options there are. So that has been really positive. Next slide, please. And then if we look more carefully just at the Okanagan-Similkameen and Osoyoos system, so those are the routes 20, 21, and the route 40 and 41, and we go back to 2014, 2015, we can really see some good gains in ridership where from the where did I draw that line? From 2014-15, when we completed the Transit Future Plan, to 2019-20 before the pandemic hit, your ridership rose by 54%. So that's something to be really pleased with. So you can see there the creation of the routes 20 and 21 is shown that when that happened in 2015, 2016. And then along the way, we introduced Route 40 service on Fridays. So, you know, back in the time of the Transit Future Plan, the Osoyoos bus didn't run on Fridays at all. So that is now an option. So it's really exciting to see, and I am very optimistic that the introduction of the new midday Route 70 trips is going to have a visible impact in terms of new trips as people ride their regional buses in order to connect to that interregional connection and continue on their travel up towards Kelowna and Peachland. Next slide, please. And then if we wanted to just look and see what the ridership in hours is like between the Osoyoos and the Okanagan-Similkameen, so the Osoyoos is the 40 and the 41, and the Okanagan-Similkameen is the 10, 20, and 21, you can see there that the ridership is a 34-66 split, and then the hours, the distribution of hours is quite similar. Certainly the Route 40 has much longer travel times, so it would be normal that it would have slightly lower ridership for the amount of hours, just because the duration of the trip is much longer for people who are coming in on that route relative to those who are traveling in from Naramata or from Okanagan Falls if they're traveling to and from Penticton. And next slide, please. So the South Okanagan connector. So what I've put here is what its ridership is doing, and we can see that, you know, it didn't exist back in 2014, 2015, and then in 2019 it popped into existence. And in the 2019-2020 year, we had 3,500 passengers. If the COVID-19 pandemic had not occurred, because that has reduced ridership, we would have expected you to be on track to have had about 10,000 passengers in this past year. Our finance group is still finalizing the numbers, and I think Chelsea has them, but I still haven't included them for what that pandemic number now looks like. but you would have been on track for about 10,000 passengers. And you may ask, well, what is normal passenger growth for an interregional connector route? And BC Transit operates several of them. So we actually have data where we can look and see what the rate of growth is. And if you could click the next slide, please, Chelsea. So what this chart shows is it shows the years of operation and the maturation of interregional bus routes. So year one, you can see that they all have relatively lower rides per hour. And then as the interregional route is the longer it's in the communities and people are aware of it and start building their lifestyles and travel patterns around it, the ridership increases. The only outlier in this is the North Okanagan connector route, and that is shown in the orange dots. You can see that in year one, it started pretty darn high. And a big part of it is that route has a UPass. So it means that the students at UBCO, I believe, have a transit access to that through their tuition fees. So every student has that pass, or it helps make it more broadly available to the students. Whereas the other interregional routes that are shown on this graph, the blue one, the Cowichan commuter, which runs between Victoria and Duncan, the Fraser Valley Express, which goes between Chilliwack and Langley, none of those have UPass programs. So that might be something as this route continues to evolve and develop, that might be something to consider. Certainly, I would like to see better local service to the Okanagan campus within the city of Penticton before we really start exploring a more robust UPass, because right now it's not the best of service. And hopefully through this Transit Future Action Plan, we can address ways to make that better. With that, that concludes my portion of the presentation. And yeah, thank you. I hope that was helpful and interesting.
Thank you, Adriana. Certainly a lot of information to absorb. So could we take the presentation off? Thank you very much. I'm going to the directors now for questions. We can start with Director Gettens. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'm Director Gettens, so I'm with Area F, so we're looking forward to having the West Bench Transit System. We were really hoping for September of this year just to help align with some of our high school kids, but we are looking forward to January. The citizens have had a few conversations around service routes, and I think there was supposed to also be a workshop with BC Transit that the citizens were hoping to have with you. So I wanted to make sure that that was still on the agenda. And also you had mentioned it being part of the youth OK Falls and Naramata route, but it's also really important that this system lines up well with the Penticton transit system. So how do we make that work when it's sort of two separate systems working together? Thank you.
Chelsea?
Sure, through the chair, Adriana, I'll just answer the first portion and then I'll turn it over to you. So when Adriana says that it will be part of the Okanagan-Similkameen service, all that really means is administratively, it will fall under that portion of the annual operating agreement. Operationally, it's all meant to integrate as one single transit system. And from the perspective, so really that's more back end, and from the perspective of the rider, it should all be seamless and work together. And I'll turn it over to Adriana for the other portion of the question.
Yes, thank you, Chelsea. Through the chair, in terms of the routing, so when we estimated the budget of hours and the resources that would be needed, we estimated we had already an alignment in mind. And so that alignment initially had been from the West Bench through to downtown Penticton. However, in light that most of the transit routes have the hub at Cherry Lane Mall, which is a major regional destination for all the South Okanagan, we have opted to try and make that possible. So we're already sort of squeezing our 400 hours a little bit to get into Cherry Lane Mall. But what will happen is in about a year and a half, we will do a review of the route that will include some public surveying to understand how we can adapt it to improve it. You know, it's an iterative process to improve transit, and you know, we work as best we can with the local communities. But it is possible we may end up making some changes. but the alignment is largely determined right now by the resources we have to make it happen. If we were to extend the route and make it longer, we would have to offer fewer trips. So there is a bit of a balancing act. We will definitely be passing it through the pockets of the West Bench that have the highest population density. Off the top of my head, I don't remember the loop of the street, but there's a few sort of little bundles there that have lots of folks. And then we can also work with the regional district so that maybe there can be some bike racks at that stop so that people who are a little further out can maybe hop on their bikes and connect easily that way. But the biggest opportunity for improvements and adjustments to that will be when we do the check-in at about 12 to 18 months following implementation. And in terms of
follow-up, if I might.
Pardon? Sorry.
I was just going to say to the chair as a follow-up. Sorry, I thought you were finished.
Go ahead, Adriana, finish the sentence.
Oh, okay, thank you. In terms of the integration with the rest of the network, so your network, the primary hub for the system is still Cherry Lane Mall, but there are secondary hubs in downtown Penticton, and most of the city routes, a lot of them stop through there. And so we will be passing the bus through there, and there will still be stops for access in that area. So there will be excellent integration with the Penticton service, as well as the services to other parts of the region for folks.
Okay, if I can go to Director Holmes, and I can always come back to Director Giddens if you have a follow-up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So my question is regarding Route 70, and with the bus now stopping at Peachland and West Bank, does that mean they're paying into the service now?
Through the chair, our annual operating agreement for that service is with the Regional District of Okanagan-Similkameen, so I think that's a question for your administration.
Because if I could follow up, I remember when we were first introducing the service, we had a big discussion about whether it ought to stop at Peachland or not. And it was, the consensus at the time was, well, if they were willing to contribute financially, then we would stop there. And they decided not to contribute. And so that's why originally we never stopped there. So now all of a sudden it's stopping there. And if they're not contributing, I'm wondering how that happened without that coming back to us. And because, you know, what we used to have was this express service, and now it's kind of a quasi-express service. And if they are going to stop at Peachland and West Bank, then maybe it should be drop off only going north and pick up only going south. I mean, it seems to me that they're getting a free ride, so to speak, in the central Okanagan.
Did you want to comment on that?
Through the chair, my answer would be the same. Our annual operating agreement is with the RDOS. I think how it's funded and the contributions of individual local governments is a question for RDOS administration.
Okay, moving on to Director Oberick.
Thank you very much to the chair. And thank you to the delegation. The presentation was tremendously interesting and informative. I have a comment and then a question. The comment, very much interested in the low carbon fleet program and program objectives. I know this is province-wide. I know Wenatchee, Washington has been very successful. I'm assuming you're familiar with their experience. So the comment, I just really think that is a incredibly positive direction and a good direction, and thank you for that information. And the question is very specific to Area D. I'm the director for OK Falls. I assume you're aware that we've had transit service only very recently. And our community, this is really a puzzle. Our community is very, very, very much supportive of transit, and yet we find ourselves in the most embarrassing of positions where our transit service isn't working very well. I know Chris Fudge has been here before. I've talked to him off the board table. We need help. I don't know how we get the help. That's part of the question. But what we're seeing for years is where we have supply when there's no demand, and we have demand where there's no supply. I had my youngest son, who's now in university in Kelowna. He had a job in Penticton and couldn't use transit because the hours just didn't work for a student who had a job. A lot of people who have jobs, the transit doesn't work. We have events at the SOEC, the hockey games, and the farmers market on Saturday. We have so much interest in using transit, and yet the transit's not available when there's interest, and it's available. And so we have these buses going by that are empty. Ratepayers call me and talk to me about it. They're concerned that it's not a good use of money, and they have some pretty good points. I know other communities have had hybrid. I know Chris Fudge talked about this, using the disabled adult transportation model, for example, using technology like phone calls and cell phones and appointments, and maybe with a different rate, a different fee schedule for a different kind of public transit experience. And so my question is, what can be done? What thoughts do you have? Is there something we can do specific in Area D that can help us get better value for the money we're paying? I think we've got our foot in the door. I think there's a real opportunity here, and yet it's pretty tough. What do I say to the community when they ask me these questions? Because you can probably tell I don't have a clue. Thank you.
Through the chair, I think that your question is excellent timing, because this is the feedback that we're looking to hear through our Transit Future Action Plan process. And it's certainly the time that we're looking to hear from people on how transit can better serve them. So I think that this is something that we can definitely look at through our Transit Future Action Plan process. And another transit innovation that I didn't mention in the presentation because it felt as though it was already getting to be extremely lengthy, was that BC Transit is currently looking at digital on-demand transit. So digital on-demand transit allows customers to request transit in a specific area using an app or a phone-in option. And we currently have an RFP, it just closed, for a feasibility study for us to better understand how that could work for our communities. So my response would also be that that's not something we're going to be implementing in the very near term, but it's certainly an option that we're going to be looking at as a transit innovation for the longer term, and something that our strategic plan points to.
Okay, thank you. And Director Monteith, I believe you will be the last director asking questions before the board meeting.
I think the delegate has a comment.
Okay, go ahead, Adriana.
Thank you. Thank you, through the chair. In terms of Area D, so in the 2015 Transit Future Action Plan, one of the subsequent evolutions of service for the Area D routes were planned to be the introduction of evening service on Fridays, and then the introduction of service on Saturdays. And when we come out for our next round of public engagement, we will be putting those options forward for the community to comment on. And then also they'll be able to let us know what is and isn't working about the existing schedule. Now, certainly with the resources that you have out right now, you have five round trips a day. If you wanted to drop that to 4 round trips a day and then reallocate service for Saturdays, that would be a more cost-effective way of introducing service on Saturdays. But again, when we come out for our engagement for a second phase of general public engagement, we can measure the barometer and see what we're hearing from the customers and the general public through that engagement about what they're looking for to make it work. Certainly when the service went in for an introductory service to start off with 5 round trips a day is quite good. You can see with West Bench, we're looking at 3. That Okanagan Falls is a larger nucleus of a community in that it's, a traditional town center village area, certainly helped us justify that 5 round trips a day. And then I think there was also a strong awareness of seniors in the community who would have midday travel needs, while a lot of shift workers tend to have evening, later night work and then weekend work as well, which at present wouldn't be accommodated under the schedule. So yes, we will have opportunities to review those, but some adjustments had already previously been identified. So we'll keep trucking along with the plan and see what we can do.
Okay, thanks, Adriana. Director Montes.
To the chair, I would really like to thank you for being here today. This is a topic that I have talked about a lot. I represent Area I, which is Clayton, Twin Lakes, St. Andrews, and Apex. And it's not working. Our stop in Clayton is on call. We have no ridership. I have emails from riders who've called and been told there's no room on the bus. You know, an on-call stop and no room to pick up anyone. Another area that I represent is Twin Lakes. The bus goes right by them. Doesn't stop. There's no stop out there. The residents in the community of Apex are paying for a service. They have to drive 20 kilometers to get to the nearest bus stop. That doesn't make sense at all. So I'm really struggling with the service. I don't know what to do. My community, there's a lot of conversation about it with RDOS staff. I did a survey, lots of conversations, but no action. And it's not servicing rural communities outside of, in my area surrounding Penticton. And I don't know if making a stop in Twin Lakes is a solution there. But for an entire community to be paying into a service and having no access, that's frustrating for an entire community. So I really would like an opportunity to really look at Area I, and I've asked for it at the RDOS board table through our financial discussions, and I'm asking for it as from BC Transit. We need to do something with Area I. Thank you.
Any final comments, Adriana? Or?
I will mention, so there are a number of communities in your regional district which are adjacent to the highway, and transit stops that are on highways have a number of safety concerns. So highway travel speeds, functional highway travel speeds, not the posted highway speeds, the ones that people actually move at, can be very, very, very high. And each and every one of your transit customers is also pedestrian. And so say you have someone who lives at Twin Lakes that is wanting to go in one direction, and say the stop happens to be on the same side of the highway they live on. Great, they can get on the bus. But then when they're coming home, if they're dropped off on the other side of the highway, that puts them in a situation where they have to cross that highway. And that is not considered a safe situation for our customers. And so one of the things that we highly, highly encourage is if you are looking at highway adjacent development, whether that is residential in terms of manufactured home parks or commercial destinations or employment destinations, is for the regional district official community plans for the electoral areas to include some kind of language around a small circulation so that we can safely pull the bus off the highway and have it go through the community. Our buses don't go backwards, they can only go forwards, through the community so that we can safely load and unload passengers. Because putting people on the shoulder of the highway where they're going to have to run across the road at one point or another in their journey is not something that we would advise. And I know the ministry would actually is very reluctant in most cases to put in highway side transit stops for that very specific reason. And that's not something particular to the RDOS. This is something that we see all over the place, where there are a lot of little pockets of communities along the edges of highways, and we have to look at ways of introducing and improving access for them. And you know, there are legacy bus stops in some places that are along highways that were put in that today would never fly in terms of safety concerns and accessibility concerns. You know, we have an aging community. There's more and more people out there with mobility needs, with canes, with walkers. So having a place where we can have an accessible stop with a ramp that people can use is also really important. Oh, and then one last piece around Apex.
Very quickly, because Adriana, we're actually running out of time, and I think all those logistical discussions should probably happen behind the scene. I would suggest to Director Montes, you know, get in contact with either Adriana or Chelsea to discuss these matters, because this is a long conversation of, you know, who needs what and where should something go. So I would like to thank you both for coming to the board, and I'm sure that there are many more questions open with directors, and perhaps the CEO can send out your contact information to the various directors, and so they can talk to you directly on these matters. And with that information, perhaps we will see you sooner. So with that, I would like to ask for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Director Bush. Seconded, Director Sentis. All in favor? Opposed? Don't see anyone. So meeting is adjourned. Now I'll give it back to the chair. Chair Kosakovic, that is.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair Bauer. Okay, directors, it is time to get started with our regular board meeting. But first, as indicated this morning, I'd like for us to be able to give a minute of silence and reflection on what has taken place with the residential school system out of Kamloops. I'd like to read a statement. On May 28th, Canadians and people around the globe learned that the remains of 215 missing children have been detected buried on the grounds of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. The Regional District of Okanagan-Similkameen Board of Directors and staff extend our deepest condolences to the Kamloops Teshwetmik First Nation as the community deals with this heartbreaking grief. We extend these condolences to our SEAL communities who were sent to this school or others like it. This profoundly disturbing discovery is a stark reminder of the damaging and lasting impacts of the residential school system, not only to the First Nations, but to many Canadians who were misled to believe the stereotypes perpetuated by those who profited from Indigenous resources. During the month of June, we commemorate National Indigenous History Month, which is dedicated to the missing children, the families left behind, and the survivors of residential schools. National Indigenous History Month recognizes the history, heritage, and diversity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples in Canada. And now, please join us in a minute of silent reflection to honor and show respect for the young lives lost. Thank you, directors and staff. We will now get started with the regular board meeting. Please have a look at your agendas. There's nothing to add or remove at this time, so I'm looking for a motion to approve as presented, moved by Director Bauer, seconded by Director Spencer Coyne. Call the question, all in favor? Oh, sorry, I'm going to pause, back it up. Was there anything anybody wanted removed from the consent agenda? Not seeing any. Okay, I'm going to go back to calling the question on the adoption of the agenda. All in favor? Thank you. Hands can come down. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. I'm looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda corporate issues. Moved by Director Bush, seconded by Director Pendergraft. Call the question, all in favor? Thank you. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. So that takes us down to B, Development Services Building Inspection, B1. Building and bylaw contraventions, 2857 Narramata Road in Area E, CAO.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So we have a property in Area E that we became aware of back in 2019 that has constructed or added or enhanced facilities without the proper permits. And we're also aware now that there may be some zoning infractions on the property with the existing use. So our larger concern is that this is now becoming a bed and breakfast or tourist accommodation use, Madam Chair, without the required inspections to make sure it's appropriate for that use. Doesn't seem to be recognition of stop work orders that we've placed on, that buildings are continuing to be added or expanded. So we are recommending that we put a notice on title that there are these infractions and that we seek injunctive action to gain compliance with our legislation.
Okay, thank you, CAO. And just a reminder, directors, you did receive a letter from these property owners. Okay, I'm looking for a motion to be put on the floor. Director Robinson, are you moving the administrative recommendation or the administrative recommendation? Thank you, Director Pendergraft, you are seconding it. Thank you. So that motion's on the floor, and we do have an opportunity now, being that this is a negative recommendation, for the property owners to speak to the board and for the board to ask questions of the property owners. I did see them logged in. So Danny, we should have Robert McMillan and Juanita Crook on the line. One of them anyways. Okay, we're just, bear with us, directors. We're just trying to bring them in. Pardon? Okay. Robert or Juanita, are you there and are you able to hear me clearly? Look again, they were in the attendees list. They still are in the attendees list. Okay, they look unmuted. Robert and Juanita, are you there? If you are, we can't hear you. Try again. Robert and Juanita, are you on the line? I see them logged in. I see them as unmuted, but we still cannot hear them. Board of Directors, you can hear me clearly, correct? Okay, excellent. Thank you. Danny's trying something else, so bear with us. Danny, you're calling them? Okay, we're going to try calling them. Any luck there, Danny?
It just hung up. I'm just redialing.
Okay. I'll ask again, Robert or Juanita, if you can hear me, go ahead and speak, please. Okay. We may have to defer this and try again another time. Danny's trying again to connect with them.
Another number here.
Trying a different number. Any luck, Danny?
No one's accepted Holmes. See if this works.
Okay, I'll ask again, Robert or Juanita, are you on the line?
I'm on the phone. I'm on the line.
Oh, Robert, good. We've been trying to get sound to hear you.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah,
for
so, yeah, I'm not sure if you had heard everything up to this point. We just have the main motion on the floor, which is an opportunity for you to speak to the issues with your property. And then if you want to give us, some comments, and then the board of directors may have some questions for you. So go ahead, please.
Sure, of course. Okay, well, we bought this property in 2018 as a bed and breakfast. It was actually sold to us as such. And of course, as you know, all the approval had not been obtained by the previous owners. So we would like to work with the RDOS and the planning and try to resolve these issues. I think we've been cooperative in terms of various things that were concerning, such as the fifth wheel and the stoves and so forth. But I don't think we don't really want to. We want to work and solve the problem. Basically, we're just interested in moving forward. And I know there's an issue with the easement. There's some of the issues that planning had. Obviously, were quite reasonable. The easement, the property line is too close, and the neighbors have talked to us about selling us some of the property so that gatehouse would be legal. And the sink in the main sort of coffee area, I think, is pretty necessary now with COVID, and I think we can. That was Mr. Wolf thought that was resolvable. So basically, I've made the points. I think it. The bylaw was taking a pretty sort of harsh look at us and making us as a non-cooperative a property owner, but we're actually not at all. I mean, I've always been extremely law-abiding and want to make sure that we get things done. And there was a jurisdictional thing between ALS and then we want to go for farm status, so we're trying to deal with that. So that's something that has to be resolved, obviously. So I just want to try to move a way forward and not be adversarial. And that's my main aim at this point.
Okay, thank you, Robert. I'm going to see if there's any questions for you from the board of directors. So directors, did anybody have a question they'd like to ask? Okay, just having a look here. I'm not seeing any. Robert, as the Area E director, I know some of the history, of course, of this property before you purchased it, and I know it had been operating incorrectly, which is not your fault. And you've tried to do work such as remove the stoves from the individual bedroom units so that not each unit has a stove and cooking facility, and there's works you have done. I also know it appears from what I've read that you guys have gone ahead and done some things without getting permits ahead of time, such as gazebos and certain things you've rectified there.
Yeah, we did do it. And right.
Yeah,
That's
so
true.
I think, part of the issue is we need to rectify some of the outstanding issues from before, but we're also seeing at the same time some things are proceeding without due process, such as gazebos being built or staircases being added, and without permitting. So we really need to, if we're going to move forward here, we need to make sure that you're taking the correct steps to obtain permits before doing the work.
No, I know that won't. I'll never do anything without. I told Mr. Wolf I'm not doing anything without his planning approval and so forth. So, and he's very involved in the staircase. I've got an engineer. He wanted an engineer report for the staircase, which I obtained. I stopped working on it. I got an engineer. We rectified that. I just haven't got time to go to actually formally apply. But I've been talking to him about that. And the other one was just a fire escape. It's not being used. There was a door. There was a door there. We just put a spiral. No one uses it. It's just sort of decorative. And it's just a spiral. It's just a way of it. It was a door there that went into nothing. But I agree. I know I'm not perfect. I admit. I'm trying, basically.
Okay, and I do understand now that it is correct that you and Juanita do reside on the premises.
No, I'm absolutely. I cooked breakfast. Yeah, I actually did breakfast this morning, actually, and then drove to Canola to do my clinic. Yeah, I'm there every day. I cook breakfast for 8 people, if it's full, or whoever's there. That's my job. So I'm there every single morning at 6 making breakfast. So I don't live in Kelowna except I occasionally stay overnight on Thursday if I'm running late. But I usually prefer to be there. Someone has to be there on site. So.
Right. Okay.
Juanita's 66 this year, so she's going to be retiring from the cancer center. She's full time now, but.
Right. Okay.
So the plan is she would move. You know, we don't like being apart, so we're going to move there into South Park Avenue in Kelowna. That would be a 2-year, 3-year program. She's committed to 3 more years. So. But I'm done. I'm done here. I'm just working 1 day a week because they can't get anybody else. So.
Right. Okay, Robert. Directors, anybody else with any questions for Robert while he's on the line? So, Robert, I have one more question then. I know you say you're committed to doing what you can to move forward and rectify some of the outstanding issues. How much time do you think that would take to rectify these issues?
I think about 3 months because I have to go and I have to get the property line situation. That's the big one, I think, because the gatehouse is too close. And the stairs, I could apply next week formally and pay the fee. I know Mr. Wolf is expecting me to do that for the staircase. But we haven't changed the floor. We haven't changed the floor plan. The footprint of the building is exactly the same. So, and the plumbing issue, I think we can resolve in the coffee area, basically. So I'm hoping I can move forward and I can go through the process of getting the variance, and I'll commit to doing that before the fall, basically. Now, COVID kind of ground everything to a halt to a certain extent. I admit I was hoping that things would just die down. They didn't, obviously. And I guess I was hoping that was not a useful thing to do. So, so I've got to get at this and fix it up with your help as the director and hopefully planning, and we can start. I mean, I always had a very good relationship with everybody at the RDOS there. I've always been, I think, quite cooperative, and people have mentioned that and there's a very good team there. I mean, it's no question that I really like everybody there. Juan and all the secretaries. I know everybody now quite well, so I've never had any bad experiences, actually. So. And you've been very helpful, too. So.
Thank you, Robert. We have a question from Director Monteith. Go ahead, please, Director Monteith.
To the chair, my question's for staff about timeline.
Okay, so let's just hold that thought till we finish with Robert. Anybody else have any final questions for Robert before we close off with him and move on to our board discussion? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up there. So Robert, we're going to move to the board to discuss this further and make a decision. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you. I hope to go. Yeah. Thank you for listening.
No problem.
Appreciate
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Okay, bye now. Have a good day.
Okay, Director Monteith, back to you.
To the chair, the homeowner seems wanting to comply. I guess I'm wanting to know about the timeline, how quickly enforcement would happen before he would incur extra costs, I guess. If he's working towards it, does staff hold off on the authority to do injunctive action until it gets to a point of impasse, or does that happen immediately?
Okay, and who do we have on? Is Ms. Miller on?
Hi, through the chair. As long as compliance is being worked towards, we can defer on the injunctive action.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, I have met with this property owner before. It's been probably about 1.5 years, and I think they've learned some lessons about not just diving in and doing things and hoping that it's okay, such as the gazebos and staircases. But they did purchase a property that has been a B&B for decades and was operated incorrectly for decades. And they've done a fair bit to remove, I think it was 5 stoves and kitchen areas, and they certainly have more work to do. I would like to postpone this vote and give them an opportunity to get the permits needed. Oh, CAO would like to comment.
We should put notice on title, Madam Chair, just so
Yeah.
some other prospective owner doesn't get caught in the same situation.
Definitely. It's the injunctive action that I'm not a fan of at this time. I wouldn't want to see us move forward with this ending up going to court. I think we can work with this owner and bring some more of the works done into compliance. So I'm hoping that in the next 3 months or so that he will be able to get the permits needed. But I do agree we should have a notice on title. So we do have a motion on the floor, and I'd like to put forward an amendment then to proceed at this time with only the notice on title. That's seconded by Director Canola. Thank you. Were there any other questions, comments? So right now we have an amendment on the floor for a section 302 notice on title only. I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Hands can come down. Anyone opposed? Okay, the amendment carries. So now we'll go to the main motion as amended. Call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Hands can come down. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. So we will work with Robert and Juanita to get things up to snuff. We'll move on now to C, Development Services, Untidy and Unsightly Property Contravention, 1108 Kingston Avenue in Headley, Area G. CAO?
We had a property in Headley that burnt down about a year ago, Madam Chair, and complete fire loss. The residue of the fire is considered untidy and unsightly contravention of our bylaw. The owner was or is currently living in an RV on the site and just doesn't have the means or the ability to affect the cleanup. So with no progress being made and complaints coming in from surrounding residents over the past year, we're recommending that we commence the process to clean that up regardless.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll go to Director Roberts.
Thank you to the chair. I'd like to make the motion.
Okay, and I see it seconded by Director Pendergraft. Okay, so we have the main recommended motion on the floor, being that that's a negative recommendation. We're going to see if the property owner is on the line. Okay, so I don't have a name in the report. Danny, do we have the individual on the line?
I can't confirm, I don't have it in here either.
Okay, Ms. Miller would have that.
Yeah, or just ask if anybody's intending to speak to the issue.
Okay, sure. Is there anybody on the line who is speaking to the property at 1108 Kingston Avenue in Headley?
I'd have to use the raise hand.
They're going to have to use the raise hand button. Ms. Miller's on the line. I'm just going to ask her for a name, please.
The name of the property owner is Joseph Goban, and he was very cooperative, and I hadn't heard from him that he planned on being a delegation.
Okay, I do not see in the list of folks in attendance his name. Pretty much I know every other name on here except for one. So I will ask you one more time. Is there anybody on the line to speak to 1108 Kingston Avenue in Headley? Okay, hearing none. So I'll go to
a number.
Pardon?
I do have a number.
Okay, Danny's going to try the number.
Increasing myself more. Nobody answered.
Okay, so directors, we've tried. There is no answer. So now we're open for discussion on this. We do have the motion on the floor, the main motion. Any comments or questions? Director Roberts, go ahead, please.
Thank you to the chair. And I know a lot of times we end up with situations and people are in dire straits and the cost or the ability to do the cleanup. And I think it's important by moving this forward that we create a means where it gets cleaned up. And then afterwards, in regards to the person's needs, if there's something that I can do with grants or issues from rural projects to assist or help, that's a whole other topic. But I feel it's so important that a lot of people don't have the means to actually do the cleanup, which we do. So I think it's important because, again, it's affecting the health and well-being of all the surrounding properties. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Roberts. Anybody else with a comment or question? This is a corporate vote. Director Gittins, go ahead, please.
The homeowner can't pay, then,
Sorry, Director Gittins, you're cutting out. Could you try starting over, please?
sure, sorry. I'm looking.
Yeah, we still can't hear you, Director Gittins.
Okay, it's a.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else with a comment or question? Okay, the administrative recommendation is on the floor. It's a corporate vote. I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Hands can come down. Anybody opposed? I'm not seeing anybody opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. That takes us down to D, Development Services, Rural Land Use Matters. D1, Temporary Use Permit Application, 128 Salacan Drive in Area D, CAO.
So this is an application for vacation rental, Madam Chair. We did have an indication from the Interior Health Authority that they don't believe that there's the necessary septic capacity for a 4-bedroom vacation rental, and they have recommended against it. So we are also recommending that this application be denied, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go to Director Obrecht.
Yes, and thank you very much. I will move the administrative recommendation.
Seconded by Director Pendergraft. Okay, thank you. So being that this is once again a negative recommendation, I'm going to ask if we might have Terrence or Donna May Scramstad on the line who wish to speak to this.
Yeah, that's Terry Scramstead here.
Terry, yes, hi, go ahead, please.
Hi.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, we put together a letter through our engineer, our septic engineer, saying that our septic system would work for a 4-person Airbnb. The letter is with the paperwork we gave you. And I'm just wondering why that can't be, we can't use that as our means that our septic is going to work. Like, I don't understand that part of it. We've done everything we could to try and make this work. There's safety inspection. We've done everything, changing CO detectors to everything's safe and sound here. We're not running something that's illegal. I've talked to neighbors and they're all on board with what we're doing. Our neighbors are a long ways away. There's no issues with anything that would happen. And our septic system is actually, it sits on the side of we're on the side of a mountain. And when we did the inspection, when I dug it up, the main tank is below, and above it is a secondary tank, and above that is a 36-inch by 7-foot culvert that our engineer mentioned that our well and would be completely run dry in order to get as much water that we have to, or effluent that goes in there in order for anything to ever happen. He said, I'll put down what I found, but this system would never ever leak. And if it did, or if anything should happen, it's going right into our septic runs right below it anyways. So I don't understand why this is an issue.
Okay, thank you, Terry. So at this time, we'd like to have questions directed to you from the board. Did anybody have any questions for the property owner? And I do have a question myself, so maybe I'll go ahead and start. I see that you had obtained additional permits over the years, or this property has, for things like deck addition, garage, etc. Was there any expansion made of this home, or is the footprint still the same?
We've only been here. Yeah, we moved in December of 2020, so we didn't do any of the building on it. The previous owner, that's all on them. We moved in the way it is right now, the way we're sitting here.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else with any questions? Director Obrick, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. And I do have a question. I want to commend the applicant for the efforts made to comply with the law, to go through the process. And I sure am sensitive to the frustration when you want to use your private property for what would seem to be a legal purpose, and the stress that brings to you and your family, and I'm really sensitive and respectful of that. I've read the report. I've been at the Advisory Planning Commission. I know the applicant was present as well. But my question, I think there was not understanding by the applicant, and maybe by others, that there was going to be this difficulty with the septic rules. And I do see the registered professional for the water, the septic, gave information partway through the process. My question is, when did you first become aware of this problem? Because
I'm sorry, we lost you.
Oh darn! Can you hear me?
No, I can't. Sorry.
Keeps cutting out.
Okay. I can't. Anybody can hear me now or not?
Yeah,
we can
hear you.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
can't. Yeah, I don't know what happened. My question is, if you could help us understand the timeline better, when you applied and when you found out about this issue, because that seems to be the issue. And I'm just curious, when did you first find out about this issue?
Do you want the long version or the short version? We found out about the septic from an email from Joanne Peachy approximately April. I got an email around April, let's say middle of April. There's three things that she needed. The signage needed moving, phone number for our son, who is our emergency contact, and they discussed the septic situation. That took me about a week to rectify. I found a guy. I had to physically dig it up myself to visually inspect it. And I did that, got the letter, got it off to Joanne as soon as I could. But other than that, we started doing this back in August of last year. I talked to the people at the RDOS, and they seemed to basically tell us that just go through the paperwork, make sure your house is safe, and you won't have a problem. And we had numerous people look over our application before they took our money, and we were never told about the septic situation or about the amount of people that, because we have a class as a 4-bedroom home, that we have to apply for an 8-bedroom or an 8-person Airbnb. We were never intending on having 8 people. The most we've ever wanted was we started with 6, more than willing to go to 4. Willing to, the other 2 bedrooms, we're willing to turn them into an office and a TV room.
Kids' bedroom.
And one is actually our grandchildren's playroom that we never intended on having people in there, and it's full of toys and kids' beds. It would be an office, I guess. But we've gone through a lot of steps and put out a lot of money, and I hate to throw the COVID thing at it, but this is the reason we're doing it. My wife lost a job a year and a half ago, and with this, the money we put out, just the $800 is out of pocket expense that we really shouldn't have been putting out or wanted to put out unless we thought this was a viable thing for us.
Great, thank you, Terry. I do have a question.
We're also down to, because we applied from May till September, we're down to, well, May's over, we're into June, and we have approximately 30 days left in the season that we are able to rent it, because we have friends coming to visit us, family from Fort St. John. Our daughter lives up there, and son-in-law and 2 little ones. They're coming to see us on the August long weekend. So those are times we won't even be able to rent it. It's basically, without going to our calendar, if we might be able to list it for 30 days tops. And I think 30 days with 4 people per day, I don't think we're being unreasonable. We've done everything possible and worked with you people. I've been down there numerous times talking to the people down there, and it seemed like we were complying with everything. Well, I don't know what
Terry,
else we can do. Yes.
Terry, to see if there's any additional questions for you. I do have one question. I mean, would you be willing to, I mean, it's your system and you need to make sure that it's cared for properly, but to do extra pump out when needed if there is ever an issue?
Yeah, we actually had it cleaned a year ago, and when we looked at it, it was exactly the way it was supposed to be. I would go out there today and dig it up and pump it out, but the effluent's going to come up to that certain point anyways. It doesn't ever drain out the way the septic systems work. But I could, if it's a problem, I would do it every week to have it done. It's labor intensive, but if this is what I have to do to get through it, I'm more than willing to do. Well, we've gone this far. We've worked really hard for this, and it's just,
okay.
Yeah, willing to do anything.
Thank you, Terry. Directors, before we move on to debate, were there any other questions for Terry while he's on the line? Director Obert, go ahead, please.
Yes, and thank you. I'm wondering if the applicant knows and can speak to what it would cost, both from a money perspective and also a time perspective, to put the septic system upgraded so that it met the compliance requirement. I don't know if you know the answer, but I hope you can enlighten us. Thank you.
Terry, is that something you know?
We can't hear anything.
Oh, can you hear me now, Terry? Terry, can you hear us now? Danny, did we lose him?
Sorry, we
Directors, you can hear me, correct? Okay. Terry, can you hear us? Okay, I think then directors will move on right now to
No, we
debate
can't
this.
hear anything.
Okay, so we're going to move on to debate this since they aren't able to hear us. Okay, so directors, any suggestions or comments? I have a few myself. If that's okay, I'll go first here then. I don't have an issue with them going ahead with a vacation rental. We all have, well, we don't all, but most of us in electoral areas have septic systems, not everyone, and you need to be responsible for the care and maintenance of your septic system. When a house is built, if they haven't had changes to that house, the septic system should have been installed to the capacity of the number of bedrooms in that home and bathrooms. So I'm not sure why this is turning into an issue, but it is. I would say they should be allowed to go ahead and do it and look after their septic system. If it fails, they're going to have a huge bill to deal with. So I would think they would want to take care of that system based on the occupancy that they have there. CIO, you had a hand up?
I did, Madam Chair. So, and I'm not the expert on this, but I believe that Mr. Garrish has some slides or presentation on it. But I know from personal experience that legislation has changed regarding residential septic systems. The onus is being placed now on the professionals to identify what size of a tank is required. It is based strictly on bedrooms. It's not about use or how many people are using a bedroom at a given time, because that changes. But this is something that we should probably take seriously.
So if it's based on number of bedrooms and they can use less than what they have, this would not be the first TUP that we have issued for a home that had more bedrooms than they were allowed to use. So
yeah, it's just impossible to enforce.
Yeah,
but
it
well,
is.
We should perhaps ask Mr. Garrish.
It is impossible to enforce, but we have allowed it before. Mr. Garrish, are you on the screen with the presentation to provide? I see your name. There you are. We can't hear you though.
Hand signals?
You said 1 minute, I think. He's switching to his phone? Okay, bear with us, board.
Can you hear us now?
Yes, all good.
Okay. So I was just going to say we don't have a slide presentation per se, but we're happy to try to answer any questions that the board may have. And I may just pass it over to Joanne in relation to our understanding of the septic system and what the property owner's rope has actually advised. Joanne?
Sure. Thank you. So I'll just note that this particular issue is really about the septic, and we do rely on the registered on-site wastewater practitioner letters that we ask for as part of a vacation rental TUP application when a property is serviced by on-site septic. So the letter that we received, in their professional opinion, they said a 4-person, 3-bedroom rental would have no negative effects. They did not provide any evidence of supporting a 4-bedroom rental, which we traditionally base on an occupancy level of 2 people per bedroom. So that would be an 8-person occupancy. So we do have a rope letter that supports 4-person, 3-bedroom, and it is a 4-bedroom house. So because we're basing that on relying on that professional to provide the advice as to whether it is appropriate, that is why we came to the negative recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll go to Director Bush. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, I'm trying to multitask. So I don't see a problem with this. If the septic tank is good for 4 people and that's what he wants, I don't see a problem with this at all, and I'm all for accepting the TUP.
Thank you. Director Canola, go ahead, please.
I also am in favor of this. He has a professional that has looked at it and moved him forward. I'm not sure how much more we can ask from anyone. He's doing his, his due diligence, and the fault would fall on him should there be a failure. So I will be supporting him moving forward.
Thank you. So my understanding, Mr. Garrish, is he's allowed a 4 persons, 3 bedrooms. Is that correct? Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Am I back on now?
You're back on. Go ahead, please.
Great. Yeah, that's our understanding from the recommendations from the ROPE is maximum 4 people. The ROPE has suggested 3 bedrooms, but the way our regulations work, it's generally 2 people per bedroom. So.
Okay, so the capacity is 4 persons is permitted with the septic size. So
Yep.
we could do a TUP for that, and it's up to that property owner to follow those regulations and look after his septic system. So I'm not in support of the motion that's on the floor right now. Anybody else with a comment? Director Obert, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. And I have a comment and a couple questions for staff. The comment is our first period of time for a TUP is what I think a year and a half, and so this would come back for review if my understanding is correct when that time passes. My 2 questions for staff. The first one is the same as what I asked the applicant, and that is when did staff first become aware of this septic issue? I'm assuming that it was the same time as the applicant, April 2021, when the ROWP, the Registered On-Site Wastewater Practitioner, gave that information. But I just wanted to double check for everybody's clarification. Is correct? And then I'll give my second question after the answer.
Sure. Yes, thank you. So I became aware of the septic issue when I received the ROPE letter from the applicant with essentially stating that only a 4-person, 3-bedroom rental was supported, and that was after he applied for his TUP and after I requested that additional information to support his application to verify that there was capacity available for the on-site septic for that proposed use.
Thank you for the clarification. And my second question, I really appreciate how hard the applicant has worked here in trying to find a reasonable accommodation to the issue. And so my second question, they've proposed limiting this, and I sure appreciate the CAO and the staff's comments on enforcement difficulties and public health issues, which are real important here, though those aren't to be understated. But the applicant's working here to limit this to 2 bedrooms and therefore 4 occupants maximum, with obviously within the limit of the existing system. And so my question is, could we look at a compromise on the TUP to limit it in such a fashion so that that's part of the permit, that it is so limited? I do understand enforcement is challenging, and indeed the staff have done a good job addressing that challenge. I think that all of us know that we have probably non-compliances in each of our areas right now, that, people haven't followed the rules. Sometimes they haven't even applied for a TUP when they should. So that's my question. Is that something we could consider in this matter?
Chris?
Yeah, certainly the permit can be structured to limit the number of bedrooms to 2 if the ROPE's recommendation is 4 people max. It's just, as per the report, we do have concerns just from an enforcement issue when we're dealing with basically what is a 4-bedroom house.
Thank you. And if I can clarify, what I really meant, and I didn't state it clear enough at all, is could you speak to those enforcement concerns and those concerns? Because that's obviously the issue. It's not can we do it, but what are the concerns so that this board has the benefit of that concern? I think it's a sensitive issue, and your help would be much appreciated if you could speak to it for just a moment. Thank you.
Chris, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass it over to Joanne.
Yes, thank you. So with the issue of enforcement, when you have a built form like a 4-bedroom house that is essentially being limited in terms of use, not by the actual built form and physicality, but behavioral compliance, that does make it more difficult to enforce in terms of what somebody would be utilizing the property for. So it's essentially an underutilization of the house, and setting up the TUP in that way does raise some red flags for essentially over occupying that house and presenting a risk to the on-site septic.
Okay, thank you. Director Ulrich raised the point that this is a temporary use permit. It can be tried if there's issues, not renewed, but they already have 4 bedrooms. So if we don't approve the TUP, just from a homeowner's perspective, and they have family and friends there, they can be sleeping 8 or 10 people every day anyways. So this just seems a little bit much that we're not willing to try a TUP in a lesser capacity. So I'm in favor of giving them a chance and trying it once, and then see what, if there's complaints and there's issues, then we don't renew the TUP. And that's generally been the practice of this board, with the one exception in Area A, where we didn't give a first-time TUP. So I will be voting against this recommendation. Any other comments, questions before I call the question? This is a corporate vote. Okay, Director Robinson, go ahead, please.
Yeah, could you just read it again so we're clear? Thanks.
Yes, the motion is that temporary use permit number D 2021.005 TUP to allow a short-term vacation rental in a 4-bedroom house at 128 Salacan Drive be denied. So the motion is to deny the temporary use permit. That's what's on the floor right now. Yeah, I'll go to Director Canola, who has a comment.
Yeah, by its own nature, just as you stated, the temporary use permit allows a large measure of enforcement. It's the duration of the TUP that would dictate how strong that enforcement is. So I will be voting against this too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Ulrich.
Yes, thank you. I'm so sorry there was a noise here. Did you recognize me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to have to vote in favor of the motion in support of staff recommendation, concerns raised by the chair, or I should say the CAO, my mistake, Chair, and by the Advisory Planning Commission. So I'll be voting in favor of this motion, but I'm also open, if this motion's defeated, to supporting another motion that had a limit in this, in in the spirit of what the applicant has indicated that they are very determined to do, which is limit this use, reduce it to a 2-bedroom, and put it into compliance in the interim and longer term. Of course, I think there's more questions, which I won't speak to now, but I don't mind speaking to staff privately, because I feel bad for these property owners when they got into a situation through what appears to be no improper conduct of their own. I think they have conducted themselves admirably, and I began commending them, and I'm going to end commending them, because I really don't see this as the applicants being anything but acting in really good faith, and for that I do appreciate all that they've done and been through. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see Director Bob Coyne has a hand up. Go ahead, please.
So I guess my question is on procedure. So if we support the motion that's on the floor now, could Director Olbrich, for example, put another motion on the floor to limit it, or does the applicant have to withdraw their application and reapply to do it with a lesser number?
CAO?
If the application is denied, we should really be waiting for the applicant to tell us what they want to do. We shouldn't be presuming on that. We usually make decisions based on a representation from the homeowner. So, I mean, the board could do that and then see if the applicant is willing to meet those terms and conditions. But I would assume once they get a temporary use permit, they'll carry on.
Okay, thank you. Chris, was anything further on that? Because right now the TUP, if I'm reading correctly, allows 4 bedrooms or 4 guests. Is that correct? Or 4 bedrooms, 8 guests is what currently is in the TUP. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So then if this is denied, they could do a TUP application for a lesser amount?
Yes.
Would they have to pay again?
Well, my understanding, I understand to be corrected, but if the current application is denied, they wouldn't be able to reapply for 12 months. But if they submitted a revised proposal with less bedrooms being proposed, and we could accept that and bring it back to the board, and yes, they would have to repay the application fee.
Which is $700?
Yes.
Or 800.
700.
700. Okay, thank you. Director Olbrich, go ahead, please.
Yes, and thank you so much, and thank you very much for the question that came from Director Coyne. I found that very helpful. My new question is, could this motion then, because I think if this motion fails, it's done. So can this motion be amended perhaps to reflect that limit back to 2 bedrooms, 4 persons maximum, understanding there's enforcement challenges. And I sure do appreciate the behavioral compliance and enforcement challenges. I don't think that is being misunderstood, but I fall back to the temporary use nature of the permit, which means that if we don't have good performance here in that first year and a half, I think they would deserve difficulties getting a renewal. So my question is, can there be an amendment? And then, you know, if there can be, does anybody want to make it, or what are the other thoughts around the table?
Okay, thank you. I'm assuming then that this motion on the floor could be amended.
It's two different, Madam Chair. This is a motion to deny. If there was a motion to approve with conditions, that should be put on its own.
So we can't amend this to be a motion to approve with conditions. So we'd have to get past this one and make a new motion immediately to amend with conditions.
Sure.
So that would be an option, Director Olbrich. So we need to deal with the motion that's on the floor, which is to deny. So not seeing any other hands up, Director. So make sure everyone understands the motion on the floor is to deny the TUP application. It is a corporate vote. So I'm going to call the question, all in favor of denial? Director Bob Coyne, Director Obrick. Okay. Those two voted in favor. I'm not missing in their hands. I'm going to call the question. Those opposed? Okay, Kuzakovich, Watt, Vasilaki, Bush, Trainer, Holmes, Gittins, Sentis, Robinson, Bauer, Pendergraft, Johansson, McCordoff, Spencer Coyne, Canola. I didn't see Roberts. Roberts, what is your vote? You are opposed? Yep, okay, got it. And I don't see Director Monteith. So the motion on the floor fails. So, Opportunity Director Obrick.
Thank you very much, and I will make a new motion to support the TUP with the limit as proposed by the applicant to 2 bedrooms, 4-person maximum. Thank you.
Okay, motion on the floor to approve with the 2-bedroom, 4-person limit, seconded by Director Bush. Okay, any questions on that? Chris Garrish, go ahead, please.
Just wanted to make a couple points for the board to consider. The current permit also currently establishes 4 on-site vehicle parking spaces related to 4 bedrooms. So I'm assuming the board might want to consider reducing that to 2. And then I recall the applicant in his presentation to the board mentioned that he felt he's potentially missed most of this season. The draft permit that's in your agenda is set to expire at the end of this year. The board may wish to extend that to December 31st, 2022.
Okay, thank you, Director Obrick.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to amend the motion to take into consideration both those suggestions, limiting the parking to 2 and extending the limit to the following year end, however that was expressed.
Can we do that as a friendly amendment, CAO?
Oh, sure.
Okay, we're going to do that as a friendly amendment so that those, the 2 parking stalls are in there and the end date of the TUP permit. Okay, so that's all in one motion now, folks. Thank you, Director Obrick. Director Monteith, go ahead, please.
To the chair, I'm wondering how the owner would be able to indicate to neighbors that it is family that's staying there versus a rental. Because if we're limiting it for a rental, but yet as a family, he can have maximum, based on his rooms, like, I'm wondering if it's setting a confusion with the neighbors. So I'm wondering if we should be limiting it.
Yeah, I would say that happens across the whole regional district with other TUPs that are out there. Sometimes they have 15 people in their home or family. So I don't know how you can keep notifying a neighbor of what's going on. If they have a concern, they would file a complaint with enforcement here, and it would be looked into. And Chris, any other suggestions there?
All I can add is that we do send out a letter after the board approves a TUP to adjacent neighbors, providing the property manager contact details. And, we do encourage residents to contact that person before contacting us. And in those scenarios, maybe they're able to clarify if it's paying guests versus family staying at a property. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, directors, we have the new motion on the floor. Any further questions or concerns before I call the question? Everybody's clear on the new motion? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Anybody opposed? I do not see anybody opposed. That motion carries. We'll now go down to D2, OCP and zoning bylaw amendments, Okanagan Falls Commercial Zone Review. CAO.
So this is for the town center plan in Okanagan Falls, Madam Chair. With that the board previously. It was referred out to the Advisory Planning Commission. It is now back, and we're recommending first and second reading with a public hearing on July 8th.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Director Olbrich.
Yes, thank you very much. And first, I want to say thank you to the staff and to the APC. I learned a lot, and it's a lot of work that's been done on this, and thank you very much. I'm going to move the administrative recommendation, and thank you.
Okay, now looking for a seconder to that, Director Pendergraft, thank you. Any questions or concerns? This is a rural vote. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Go to D3, zoning bylaw amendment, areas A, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I. CAO.
There was a change to the regulation on the BC Building Code back in 2019, Madam Chair, that allows a larger square footage for accessory dwellings and secondary suites. So they can now go up to 125 square meters, where the regulation used to say 90 square meters. And we're in favor of that. So we're recommending that we give this amendment first and second reading and come for public hearing on July 8th.
Okay, thank you. Director Olbrich, are you moving that?
Yes, I'd like to move the administrative recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Seconded by Director Roberts. Any questions or comments? This is a rural vote only. Call the question. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll go to D4, minutes, Board of Variance, April 6, 2021, CAO.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So these minutes of April 6 from the Board of Variance, they had an issue that they were dealing with. It was a deck on a non-conforming mobile home, which is fine. But then they tacked on a recommendation to the board to look at reconciliation between our zoning rules and the structure of the ALC Act for places under 4 hectares. We haven't had time to look at what the impact of that would be yet, so we're recommending that it be referred back to administration.
Okay, thank you. Looking for a mover for this. Director Roberts, seconded by Director Monteith. Any questions or comments? This is a corporate vote. Call the question. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Motion carries. D5, minutes, electoral area D, APC, April 13th, 2021, CAO.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair. So there was also a recommendation in the April 13th Area D APC minutes where they were discussing the retail cannabis application, and they've made a recommendation to table that until a review of the zoning bylaw can be done. And we would need to have more time to look at that. So we've asked that it be referred back to administration.
Okay, thank you. Director Olbrich, I'll go to you on this.
Yes, thank you to the chair, and I would like to make that administrative recommendation motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Director Roberts is seconding that. Any questions on this? It's a corporate vote. Call the question. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Director Pendergraft, were you opposed? No. Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Go down to E, Public Works, E1, Air Quality, Central Okanagan Regional District, request to present, CAO.
So this was interesting. So the chair received a letter from Chair Gibbons of the Central Okanagan Regional District regarding air quality. As the board may recall, or some of you, there was a spurt of activity around air quality back in the 2006 to 2010 period, where the 3 regional districts in the Okanagan got together and established a coalition. And there were a number of concerns at that time, and still are. But over time, there were some disagreements on staffing and resourcing, and some of the programs, it initially started out as an educational, informational type of activity, and then grew as commissions and coalitions tend to do. In the end, it broke down. North Okanagan rescinded their service. We never had created a service. We treated it as a pilot and just covered it under general government. And the Central Okanagan really turned their activity over to the city of Kelowna. And the city of Kelowna has some interesting statistics on air quality. And again, they're making the argument that air doesn't stop at geographic boundaries. So they want to talk to their colleagues on either side of them about reestablishing an air quality activity. So Chair Gibbons has requested permission to appear before the board to put that discussion forward. And we're recommending that you do that, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Is anyone willing to move this motion to invite Chair Gibbon to our board? Director Roberts, seconded by Director McCordoff. Any questions on this? Director Holmes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just, I guess in advance to her coming to speak to us, I wonder if we could get a copy, receive a copy of that 2010 memorandum of understanding that she refers to in her letter.
Okay, we'd be able to send that out. Okay, thank you very much, Director Holmes. Any other questions or comments? Director Roberts, go ahead, please.
Thank you to the chair. And I'm wondering whether or not around the same time, this is good to have that discussion around the chipping program, which was initiated in the area in regards to air quality versus farm subsidy, because it is a part of that discussion and looking at it as a funding model and how it would, or if it does, tie to the air quality question.
Okay, thank you, CAO Newell.
Yeah, there were a number of programs that had been established under the Air Quality Coalition. The wood chipping program was one of them. The stove exchange was another. There was a bunch of stuff. And when the coalition dissolved, we chose some of them, like the chipping program, to just put it under a landfill service because we had nowhere else to put it. So I think what we do is discuss whether the board wanted to get back into air quality, and then we can discuss which programs or how we want to go about it. So the process may be better off if we hear what Chair Gibbons has to say, see what our colleagues to the north want to do, and then we can decide how we want to proceed from there.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else with a question or comment? Okay, not seeing any.
No, I think Director Canola has it.
Did he? Okay. Director Canola, go ahead, please.
Does this require a motion to hear what they have to say, or is it just a directive?
We have a motion on the floor.
Fair enough, thank you.
Okay, anybody else with a question or comment? It's a corporate vote. I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Hands can come down. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. We'll go down to F, Community Services, Okanagan Falls Parks and Recreation Commission resolutions, minutes for March 25th and April 8th, 2021. CAO.
Thanks, Madam Chair. There were a number of recommendations from the Okanagan Falls Parks and Recreation Commission to the board in those two sets of minutes, and we wanted to give them due consideration. So the majority of them, we were able to provide a response to the commission directly, just giving a current status. But there is one on there where they have recommended that we forward an application to the South Okanagan-Similkameen Conservation Program to take over the Save the Aster, Save the Beach issue that the commission has been dealing with on Christie Park Beach. So we're recommending that we do forward that application on to them, Madam Chair, for their comment. We weren't sure that this falls within the terms of reference or the mandate for SOSCP, but nevertheless, we should pass that on and see what they say.
Okay, thank you. So there's two recommendations here. I'll go to Director Olbrich on the first one.
Yes, and thank you. And I would like to speak to this. Perhaps I'll look at the recommendations first. I'm having a challenge finding it on my screen. If you can help me to find the recommendations.
So the first recommendation, Director Olbrich, is that the minutes of March 25th and April 8th, 2021 Okanagan Falls Parks and Recreation Commission be received.
Thank you. I'll make that motion. Thank you.
Okay, and seconded by Director Pendergraft. Any questions regarding the receipt of the minutes? It's a corporate vote. Call the question. All in favor? Hands can come down. Anybody opposed? That motion carries. Then we'll go to the second motion there. Go back to Director Olbrich.
Right, and I'm still having trouble seeing it, although I recall looking at it. I don't know where it is. Could you help me again with the second recommendation?
Yeah. I'll read it out. The second recommendation is that the request for the regional district to submit an application to South Okanagan-Similkameen Conservation Program to investigate Save the Aster, Save the Beach be referred to South SOSCP for comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I did find it at page 204. I'd like to make the motion, but to speak to it, should I wait till, I guess I'll make the motion first and speak to it later. Thank you.
Yeah, Director Gittins, are you seconding? Yes, okay. Go back to you, Director Olbrich.
Right, and I, first of all, I want to say thank you very much to the CAO and to the staff. This has been a conversation we've had at the board from the first strategic planning meeting that I attended after election in November 29, 2018. What I'm seeing here, I just want to express gratitude because the report from the CAO is incredibly kind and polite when it says we've been discussing a more efficient process for how best to get our Recreation Commission advice heard by the board. So first off, I just want to say thank you. Secondly, this issue, I'm gonna be brief, but this issue of the Aster has a history that I suspect most of our board doesn't have awareness of. I know we had 12 new members on this board who weren't there before. On the previous board, I know Director Sidden spoke to this, the media picked up on it, but indeed, before I was elected, I spoke with Environment Canada, I spoke with the provincial Department of Forests, I spoke with biologists in both those departments, I spoke with the COSEWIC, the Committee of Species Endangered Within Canada, which is the committee under the Species at Risk Act, which came into force in Canada 2004. The subcommittee chair, Mel Del Medinger, was the chair of this committee in 2006 that designated this Aster as endangered within Canada. If you read the report that was submitted to that committee in 2006, it's 33 biologists. At the time, our member of parliament, Richard Canning, was on that committee. If you read the report itself indicated more work had to be done. This is not an endangered species. It goes from Mexico all the way up, about 1 million square kilometers, probably more. It's in the South Okanagan because of our climate. This is a climate species, so you don't find it in Edmonton or Montreal or other parts of Canada. There was a report done in 2013 which was a Section 44 report under that legislation, which identified, I'm trying to remember now, I think it was 8 locations. In 2006, there were only 4 locations. The regulation is mathematical. If you're under 5 locations, you're endangered. If you're under 10, you're at risk. If you're over 10, you're not even on the list. There are more locations in Canada. My understanding on the Parks and Rec Commission years ago is that there's an accord between the province and the federal government. This is a federal statute. This statute applies to federal lands, national parks, First Nation lands. It doesn't apply to this land, but there's an accord with the province. The province, under the accord, takes enforcement action against provincial lands. That was being threatened, a fine up to $1 million. The result of that threatened enforcement action was a stewardship agreement, which was put in place, dated April 11, 2017. It's a 5-year term. And that agreement, to my observation, has not been properly complied with when it comes to annual reviews and process. That's a different issue. As you can imagine, I had a UBCM meeting on this issue with Minister Donaldson on Wednesday, September 25th, 2019 at UBCM. Some of the members of the board may remember I made that motion. I've met Member of Parliament Richard Canning on this. Our community is very concerned. We need to deal with the issue. I have no idea whose idea it was to refer this to the South Okanagan Similkameen Conservation Program. Neat idea, though, because there are biologists there. I've talked to Del Mittinger when I spoke to him back in 2018. He said his advice was don't worry about it because it doesn't apply to federal lands. He had no idea, of course, that there's the accord between the two governments. The provincial government's reviewing a change in legislation, a Species at Risk Act, which will be more in some kind of concordance with the federal legislation. I think you're starting to get the sense that this is rather complicated. It matters to Area D. It matters to OK Falls. If you look at what it did to our waterfront park, we lost about 60% of that Christie Memorial waterfront to this protection of a species that's literally not endangered. Again, when I talk to Rosiwick and ask how do they determine that, it's just a mathematical formula. The report said 4. That's all they do. The chair of the committee said it's not endangered. So you start to see how that gets very interesting. When we look at this particular site, because the management of the park did not have the kind of rototilling and beach grooming that you have in Penticton, there were 13 plants, 13 in 2013. If Penticton didn't have good beach grooming, they might have had 13 too, and we could have shut down some of the Penticton beaches. When you look at 2016, this is a roughly 20,000 square foot red area, 20,000 square feet more or less. This is a waterfront stretch that in market value terms, probably $3-4 million of land that we're not getting benefit at traditional use in the community. It impacts our economy, it impacts our tourism, it impacts the enjoyment of ratepayers. But when you look at the number of plants on that 20,000 square foot spot, 13 in 2013, by 2016, 3 years later, because we weren't allowed to groom the beach or rototill it, over in this area, I'll have people guess how many plants there were, and I'll tell you, over 134,000. Yeah, that I thank Director Suntis for her reaction. This is not a fragile flower that won't grow. Indeed, we have the secret in OK Falls. We grow it really well. And although we believe the beaches of Christie Memorial Park are magical, they're not magical that way. This thing will grow. Indeed, I went myself in early September 2018 2018, before I was elected, we had a fire by Waterman Hill. So I went to watch I was scared, like most of our community. I watched the fire response, and I was there, so I thought I'd go look. Now, this plant only comes into bloom. It's like a dandelion. It blooms for a couple of weeks a year. And if you don't look for it at the right time, you won't find it. I went walking myself. I'm not a biologist. I don't have experience. I found more of it over by the Sun and Sand property. 2 distinct titles of property away, about 350 yards. I communicated this information to Darcy Henderson, Environment Canada, the lead out of Kelowna. I communicated it to Josie Simon, the provincial department of I've got emails I can show people on this. Josie came out on September 26th, more or less. I have an email, October 2nd. They tell a nice story about how you have to be very careful because this plant is hard to identify and you probably don't have it right. Then they confirm there's hundreds of them over on the property under the picnic shelter, which is now gone. And there's some there today. So I found an additional location. Now we need to find more than 10 locations. And you'll notice if you've reviewed the minutes, which were just voted to be received, one of our Parks and Rec Commission a few years ago put in the budget $5,000 a year. There might be 15 or 20,000 there to deal with this issue. We've got the money. We also know that we can plant this. We're proposing an aster garden, or aster corral as the community's calling it, over on Kenyon Park, which is where that location I found is. We're going to speak to this another day at this board table, where I'm going to ask all the partners at this board table. I'm talking about the city of Penticton, please, Summerland, please, Naramata, please, West Bench a little bit, because Max Lake has one of the known locations. I'm going to speak to Kaleden, please, Oliver, please, Asuyus, please. If we can, and I think we can do it, if we can put these aster gardens through our region, get our number over 10, we can get this off the list and we can have a success. Now, Del, this is interesting. Under the Species at Risk Act, they're supposed to review this every 10 years. This decision was made 2006. There has been no review. It's now, when we do the math, it's 15 years. When I spoke with Del Menninger and asked if they were going to do a review, if they'd done a review, he said no. When I asked if they were going to, he laughed. I said, what's so fun? He said they have no budget, no money, and they don't do it. Indeed, they're seeking amendment to take the review out of the Species at Risk Act, which sounds like a good idea if you care about species at risk, to take out the mandatory review. I asked what triggers I said, how do you when will the review be done? Well, we're behind on hundreds of species, and we have a priority, a triage system. I said, how do you get on the list? He says, well, you have to be at risk. I said, well, we're not at risk. He says, that's right. So we're never going to get on the list. I said, can we do an application privately, since the government doesn't fund it? Can we do it? He said, absolutely. The Act has provision. If you will fund it, you can make an application. I've spoken to Darcy Henderson about this. I've spoken with a member planning on this. These are experts. Richard was on the committee. So if we had more than 10 locations in Canada, all of Canada, we could, through a cost, which we will pay out of our community, we can save the aster and save our beach. It's a double win. And the region benefits. When I say the region, I mean Penticton benefits and Oliver benefits and Asuyus benefit. Because when we benefit in OK Falls and our economy is a little better and our businesses do a little better and our residents can have the benefits of those things, you all benefit as well. And so I'm asking for your support in the future when I bring this back. I want to thank everybody for listening. I can talk for hours on this, and I can tell that people are paying attention. So I'm just so grateful for this opportunity. And thank you. I do not know what the South Okanagan-Similkameen Conservation Program will say. I've heard the CAO say they may feel it's not even within their ability, which may be the answer, which is back to the department of not my department. We need to find a solution for this. We don't know how I will be coming back to this board when we get our Astor Corral going and we're successful, asking all of you to help us. But with respect to this, the timeliness, the urgency of this, I know some of you have concern about urgency. This contract comes up for renewal, the 5-year contract's coming up, and I'm going to be speaking against the renewal. I'm asking for staff help on this. We had staff, Justin Shuttleworth did the original project with Josie Simon. We want to change that agreement. There's a lot of work to be done here, but I wanted this board to be aware because some of you might not be aware of this issue. I know some of you are. So thank you very much for listening to me. I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so directors, we have a motion on the floor to refer out to South Okanagan-SIMILKAMEEN Conservation Program to investigate. There's a question by Director Gettins. Go ahead, please.
Thank you to the chair. I'm in favor of reaching out to the South Okanagan-SIMILKAMEEN Conservation. I'm curious to hear what they have to say, and I think, you know, it's hard when you have such complex issues that do go across different governments for an area. I have seen where that Astor is and where the part of the beach is taken up, and it is really frustrating for the community. I can see why they need a resolution for this because it is impacting a really beautiful part of the lake. So I'm in support of this and curious to hear more about it and how to move forward.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion on the floor. Was there any other comment or question? It is corporate vote. I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Hands can come down. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. We'll go down to F2, commitment of funds to construct a multi-purpose sports facility in Princeton, CAO.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So Area H wants to commit $31,250 from their Community Works Fund to the Princeton Lacrosse Association to assist in the construction of a multi-sports facility. And we're recommending in favor of that, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Director Bob Coyne.
Yes, I'd like to make the staff recommendation, please.
Okay, thank you. I see it's seconded by Director Spencer Coyne. Any questions or comments on this? It's a weighted corporate vote. I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Hands can come down. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. We'll go down to G, Legislative Services. G1, Indigenous Relations Update for Information Only, CAO.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair. I believe I'll just turn this over to Ms. Malden and she can provide this update.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, please, Ms. Malden.
Thanks very much. Just a quick update to the board here on some of the things we've been working on in the last little while. So we did have an opportunity to sit down with the chief of the PIB in the last month and just sort of get some ideas as to how best to communicate with different levels in the band, whether that be staff or chief and council, that sort of thing. So they provided some really good information to us on what that might look like. And we're going to develop some protocol, especially it'll be helpful for staff here in the office to understand who they may and who they should be communicating with. But it also offers some guidance as well for board members in that. They did indicate that they were looking forward to being able to get back together again, which I thought was really great news. And so we're reaching out in the same way to the other 3 bands, just to see, you know, how do they want us to get information to them, what level of information, that sort of thing. So it was a nice conversation, actually, a great re-engagement with the chief. So we're going to continue to have those sorts of dialogues in different ways. And we will be working towards putting together an in-person C2C as soon as we can, and perhaps some other meetings with, you know, chief and council and the board, or specific board members that, you know, relate or neighboring of a specific band. So those are in the works. Also, we were given some really good information about training, so cultural training, you know, Indigenous awareness training, that sort of thing. So we're researching different avenues there And the goal is to have some good, meaningful training before the board here in the next little while. So when I have more information on that, I'm happy to report that. In the meantime, we found several and taken ourselves several online courses. Some of them have different modules. They're quite extensive, which are very applicable to local government. And so I'm going to share those links with the board when the meeting is over. And you can have a look at that and see if any of those pique your interest. That fits in nicely with our training plan for the year. So what else did I have on here? I think really, we wanted to let the board know that we're still working towards that goal of having a comprehensive report by the end of the year as to UNDRIP and potentially the impacts on this regional district. Whether an Indigenous liaison position is something to consider, or whether we just build practices into every role. So we don't have a whole ton of more information coming from the province yet. I know they are working on, getting some of their groups together, and the conversations are happening, and I continue to try to push my way in there to get on any sort of committee that may be happening at the provincial level, especially with respect to local governments and regional districts. So as soon as we have more information on that, I'll update the board as well.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Malden. So we did speak with PIB about opportunities for Indigenous cultural training, which they will help us with. Coincidentally, at the same time, we received an email from ONA with the opportunity to participate with an online session, understanding our role in reconciliation and our role in the implementation of UNDRIP. So I know that several board members have responded to that you're going to participate in that online session coming up. I believe that was June 14th. If anyone didn't get that email, please reach out to Ms. Malden and make sure that you check to see if you are signed up for that. I believe Crystal's going to handle that for us if you've responded to her. Questions? I see Director Bush. Go ahead, please.
Yes, so I would like to know if our original protocol is still in effect, except I think Asuya's Indian band opted out, but where are we with our original protocol?
CAO?
The protocol agreement is dormant right now. It was the regional district of Okanagan-Similkameen and 3 of our Indian bands. So Director Bush is right. Upper Similkameen was never a signatory to that. The Osoyoos Indian band has since withdrawn, leaving the Penticton Indian band and the Lower Similkameen Indian band as participants. But really, it's been dormant over the past 4 years. So the renewed interest, although I should say that the Upper Similkameen band has entered into a protocol agreement with the regional district and the town of Princeton on a protocol agreement. So good news on that front. But as far as a total regional district protocol agreement, it is dormant at this point.
Okay, thank you. Director Holmes, you're next, please.
Yeah, thank you. So a few weeks ago, Summerland Council had a really great meeting with Penticton Indian Band Council, the chief and council, and we talked about a number of things. And one thing that came up was signage on Giant's Head Mountain, and both interpretive signage and place name in language signage. And when you consider, in that discussion that how important language is to anybody's culture, and how important the recognition of their language is to reconciliation, it might be worth us looking at our signage policy, so that we ought to really be thinking in terms of throughout the region, every place name marker is in the Syilx language, and that we have interpretive signages in our parks and things like that. And so that was just one thing I just wanted to share, because it really came out in our meeting with them, which was quite enlightening, I think.
Thank you, Director Holmes. Director Gittins, go ahead, please.
Thank you for the chair. I'm glad that Director Holmes shared that. I think that's really great to hear. I'm wondering if it would be possible if some of our municipal partners are meeting directly with Penticton Indian Banning Council, if there is room for some of our rural directors to also meet directly with Penticton Indian Banning Council. Sometimes I think when we're at a board of 19, and then we also have the council members from the band, it's just a lot of different calendars and schedules to align. So if municipal members already have some of these established relationships, it might be nice to have that, see if we can kind of work out something for some of the rural directors who aren't part of those conversations. That's the first comment. And then my next question is also in this report that emails or calls should be directed to the executive assistant, which I think makes very good sense. And then any urgent matters are to go to the CAO. Could I ask staff to share those contacts and names with the board, please?
So Ms. Malden, is that something you are able to share?
Certainly, I believe those are public, so we'll just confirm with them before we do send that out, but I do believe they're public, so yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Sorry, just as a follow-up, could you just, thanks, Chair, could you just comment on the possibility of rural directors having a table with the band if we're having a hard time scheduling something?
Yeah, so in the report, Chief Gabriel had indicated he wanted to continue meeting with myself as chair and CAO, and that whenever there's a matter that impacts an electoral area specifically, that we would then invite that EA director to join in on that meeting. I don't want to speak for Penticton or Summerland about them inviting directors into their meetings with PIB. That would be maybe a separate discussion you could have directly with those mayors and council. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, and we will move on to the next item. We will go to item H, CAO report.
The province recently announced their 4-step restart program based on the number of vaccinations and the lowering numbers of active cases of COVID-19, Madam Chair. So with those definitions of what their plans are, we're working right now administratively to come up with the regional district restart program. So we'll intend to bring that forward into committee on June 17th to have that discussion with the board about how we're going to get back to business. So just heads up on that, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
No.
Okay, great. Chair's report. Tomorrow morning, CAO and I are in on the BC Restart update call. And also the IHA vaccine roundtable update that got bumped from today to tomorrow for many of those mayors who are in on that. And I was going to mention about it's June 14th, the session that ONA, Okanagan Nation Alliance, sent out to invite us to. So I really strongly encourage you to get back to Christy and her team to let her know if you'd like to be signed up. Tessa is hoping to have numbers from us as to how many people will be participating in that. That's everything from me. I'm going to go now to director's motions. Anybody with a notice of motion for today? Director Monteith, go ahead, please.
To the chair, I had emailed Christy Malden my motions, but I'm only going to do the one. So I can read it out if you'd like.
Yes, please.
All right, so director motion that finance present RDOS budgets to directors for all services with a -2, 0, 2, and 3% increases for all budget committee meetings annually, and that finance present RDOS budgets in a live format to allow directors to visually see impact to all electoral areas and member municipalities during decision making for all budget discussions.
Okay, thank you. So I'm assuming you've put that in writing to Christy. Okay, great. So we will see that at the next meeting as a motion that we can discuss. Thank you. Any other notice of motions today? Okay, not seeing any. That takes us to board members' verbals update. Anybody have an update from their community today? Director Gittins, go ahead, please.
I don't have an update as much, but I did want to let the board know that I received a letter from South Okanagan Pride asking for the regional district to publicly acknowledge that June is also an internationally recognized as Pride Month, and I just got it last night, so I'll send that over to Christy. So just maybe we can make some time to discuss that further to next time we meet. I also was hoping we could get a bit of time to talk about how we're moving forward in light of maybe gathering again in person. We've had really interesting conversations just in other roles about what that looks like, recognizing that not everybody is going to have the same comfort level as everybody else. And one of the questions that we have been asking different groups that we meet with is, you know, are we trying to rush back to what we had, or are there things that have been happening in the past year that have been really beneficial? So I've really enjoyed the electronic, you know, especially the public information meetings, because I've been able to go to more of them because they're electronic. So I'd like to just to find some room for the board to discuss what that looks like, especially if we have some board members that aren't as keen to come back in person whenever we are allowed to do that, and just sort of what are our technical requirements that we need. So if we could put some time aside to discuss that, I think that would be an interesting conversation. And I just wanted to clarify my request previously around the Penticton Indian Band and the rural directors. So what's missing for me as a rural director is that I'm not part of the municipality, obviously, of Penticton and Summerland. So when there's opportunity for the CEO and the chair to meet, I think that's fantastic, and I think that's a great way of doing it. What would be really helpful is if some of the rural directors who are interested could be invited to an introductory meeting so we can start putting some faces and names together for some of us that don't have those relationships. That would be something that I'm looking for the chair to do for the regional district director, for the rural directors. Like if Summerland or Penticton want to invite me to the table, I'm always happy to come, but I think the regional district should also take a role in that as well. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. Just to clarify, we did ask Chief Gabriel, and he has indicated he's extremely busy, and if there's an item specific to area E, F, D, I, any of the areas, then he would like us to invite that director. So it's not, he wasn't really looking just for general meetings without specific topics. I hear what you're saying, but we did specifically put the question to him and asked him what he wanted, being that he is extremely busy. So if you're asking for a face-to-face coffee meeting, I'm just trying to get at what we need to go back to the chief and ask him for.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I guess for me, I don't know if other meetings around with municipal, maybe some of the municipal directors can help me out on this. If we have to have it, like I've got a list of things that I would love to speak to about with PIB that's impacting Area F. So maybe if I could be invited to one of your next meetings then, I don't know. I think doing it one-on-one like that is great, and I recognize that everybody's busy. That's why I think it's nice to have one of those kind of group meetings. So where you get ideas like signage around Giant's Head, and you can share that as a council. And I think that there's some probably different ideas that we would align with between Area D and also with E and I and F. So yeah, just looking for something on that front. And I guess if you've got a meeting coming up, maybe you can extend it to us or something. I don't know, but I'm sort of hoping that you could help us out with that as the chair.
Yeah, so we don't have any meeting coming up. They get booked when there's a talk.
I think Director Gittins wants the incorporated communities to invite rural members when they're having a meeting.
Yes, but she's asking us to. So no, she has items she wants to talk to PID about. So what I would suggest, Director Gittins, is you need to get that list into CIO Newell, because there may be things on there that we have the answers to that we don't need to book a meeting about, or it might be something new that we can put to Chief Gabriel to see if he'd like to have a meeting about. So he wants to know ahead of time, what are the topics? We don't book meetings just random. We present the topics so they can prepare for those questions and ideas. So if you want to get a list to CIO Newell, then we could look at incorporating that into a future meeting. We don't have a meeting planned at this time. We book them when
Thank you.
there's
Just for
a
follow up for
topic.
clarity, I'm not asking municipals or municipalities to invite me. If they want to invite me, they know where I am. I am
Right.
asking Chair and CAO to help rural directors make those connections. The list of items that I want to talk with PIB, they're there. Like they've been on the list. I don't think there's any surprises. So what I'm looking for is support from the regional district for the regional district rural directors to have the same opportunity. Thanks.
Okay, so just to clarify, then get us a list of what you want to talk to him about so that we can book and he can have a heads up on what the specific topics are in case he needs to get updates from some of his staff. He needs to be able to be prepared to speak to those issues so that he's not just surprised. If anybody has issues you'd like to bring up, topics, then get a list in, please. Then we can look at booking it and also booking adequate amount of time for that discussion. Director Monteith, you're next, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to share the update that Cleveland is going to be having its sewer referendum meeting sewer referendum this Saturday. I want to thank staff. Staff have been amazing through this whole project. The communications has been outstanding. Legislative services, engineering, finance. I mean, every step of the process has been very informative to the residents, and I've heard a lot of great feedback about the professional communication that has occurred. And I just want to thank staff because regardless of the outcome, I feel like the process was successful. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Director Obert, go ahead, please.
Yes, and thank you. The Area D Governance Study Committee, which was appointed at our last board meeting, had a meeting, and it was the first and only meeting so far. There'll be meetings every couple weeks. There's a lot of work that's still going to be done. In the next meeting, the chair will be appointed and other things will be done. The request for proposals has, I understand, gone out, and there's a closing for June 21. The committee will then do a review of that, and my understanding is there's a hope that it would come back to this board at the July 8th meeting. So that's the update on that, and special thank you to Christy Malden, who's been amazingly wonderful in this process. But Jim Zaffino as well, who has been participating, and I'll tell you, we got a real good committee, and there's a lot of questions that are going to get some answers, and we're looking forward to that process. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Obert. Anybody else with an update from their community? Director Obert, you had something else or leftover hand? Leftover hand, okay.
Just
anybody else? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up. If that's the case, that brings us to the end of our board meetings. So if there's nothing further, folks, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Director Bauer, followed by Director Robinson. Thank you. Call the question. All in favor? Thank you. And anybody opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Motion carries. Have a good evening, everybody. Take care.